All right. Welcome back. We are MDEV1004. That's Mobile APIs and Frameworks. And it's a sleepy Monday morning on week 8, right? Because most of the other people in the world, at least in Canada, are all enjoying their Monday off. But that's okay because we've got some really good stuff happening today. As we're back to talking about mobile APIs and frameworks in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian, week 8, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. And let's talk about where we are. So we're sitting at the top of week 8. And this week we're talking about a couple things. Third-party authentication with OAuth. We talked about that briefly. We'll touch upon that again. OAuth strategies. We have to talk about an OAuth strategy that's going to change today, which is for JWT. And I'm introducing assignment 3 today, and as well as ICE 6. And again, we'll talk about those two things. And then ICE 6 is due this weekend. That's Sunday, July 9th. Can't believe it's already going to be July 9th. Almost halfway through July, if you think about it. We've just started the second half of the semester, and it's going to be due this Sunday. So that's what that is. Where last we left off, we talked about putting together a mid-semester test. I think most of you, I was looking at them already. Again, I'm partly through all the marking for all the stuff. I should be releasing it this week, I'm hoping, just getting to all of it for you. But our mid-semester test, I think it was fairly straightforward, again, from a professor perspective. I also think, for the most part, you thought that too, because most of you did very, very well. Let's see. Someone is incoming. Hey, Robert, how you doing?
How you doing? Good.
Excellent. So we're just talking about what we've done so far, which was we're sitting at week 8 of our semester. Again, this is where we were. And over the coming weeks, we have a couple of things to do. How to connect to a social API, how to connect to an API in general with some kind of interface, okay? Because your assignment 3 is going to be APIs with interfaces. How do we do that, right? So excuse me, that's what's coming up. And then after week 11, we're going to get into payment gateways, again, more API stuff. How do we incorporate those? And then finally, deployment options, different deployment options. We've been deploying to Render, and we're going to talk about a little bit about AWS and GCP. And maybe if we can get to Azure, I'd like to talk about that too, the 3 platforms, if we can get to that. So that is kind of winding out our second half of the semester. So the second half is all going to be about, kind of displaying your API in your user interface and all that kind of stuff. We've made kind of a custom API, how to connect to them, how to use them, and how to incorporate them in our on our back end. And for the most part, that's what we're going to be doing. So this week, we're talking about, like I said, OAuth and assignment 3. Assignment 3 is really about creating a secure API with your choice of user interface. So that means iOS or Android. It's totally up to you what you want to use. I will demonstrate some interface stuff over the coming weeks, so that way we can use something like that, with our for what we're going to be doing with assignment 3. Okay, so that's what's happening now. And any questions, Robert? How you doing? Are you now that you've had a bit of some time off? I'm hoping.
Doing okay.
Like last week was okay for you. The other thing I was going to ask is, are you good with us being remote today? Because I know that a lot of us are, like I said earlier, still sleepy from being off all week. So hopefully you're okay with that. Okay, so let's talk about. You are okay? Okay, that's good. We are. Let's talk about JWT a little bit. But actually, before I get there, just since you're on, Robert, how did you find the midterm test? Did you find it okay overall?
Yeah, I think I took about 40 minutes, 35 minutes to get it
Okay.
done, so it wasn't anything unexpected. I think that um, generally it was if you follow along with class, you wouldn't have had any problem because all I did was and I you must because it was open book. I just used the entire template, copied it down, and made entire changes to it overall just to make it function that was required and updated the database and the atlas. And as far as I was concerned, no one should have had a problem with it. I didn't.
That's good. And I think part of that is the the strategy always is not doing anything different than what we've done in class. I mean, really, what I'm trying to do is train you so that you understand everything. And so it's just another pass through is what the exams are for. That's what they really are. They're not supposed to be tricky in any way. The only thing I did differently was I did present, the last digits of your, kind of your ID to give you a different data set, but that's about it. The rest was there's nothing tricky about it. So hopefully that was pretty good. Did you have a chance to see the little NPM module I put together? By any chance, did you use that at all?
I looked at it, but I decided just to keep my own stuff and just continue.
Yeah, it's easier. I mean, since you already had it, I put it up there just in case someone didn't have anything, right? So.
Yeah, and that's kind of like I was going. That's your starting point. If you did nothing up to that point, you're a guesser.
Right? Yeah, so that's why I put that together, and that way it kind of helps people out, and so they don't start with nothing. All right. Well, I wanted to. So where last we left off, let's talk about this a little bit, and I'm just going to pull up our. I'm just going to go here to GitHub.
The only thing that I'd have to ask is and it has really nothing to do with the test per se. The marking is a little bit behind though.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I'm gonna get there. It's just putting things together. So you should have everything ready to go this week, and you should know where you stand. I think for everybody this week, I think that's pretty good. That's going to be pretty good for you guys. So I'm not really worried too much about most people. I think that if you follow it along, most people who follow along are going to be okay. I think the people who should be worried are the people who haven't submitted stuff, right? So that's kind of where I'm at, right? So I don't think I'm really worried about it right now, but I will get it out this week. That's my plan.
But I think this week is also the last week to drop the class.
Yeah. So that's why I got to get that stuff done, right? So, all right. Thank you for that. So let's get into what we did last time. So last time, if we're going to talk about it, we did. So this is our ICEs stuff. We did ICE 5, right? And we modified our package. We had a little bit of security in there, but the security that we put in there, right, was for session security that we talked about, how to make that work, and so on. And I just wanted to talk about how to use JWT this week and all that kind of stuff. So let's get into that. I'm just going to bring up our stuff. One sec. Let's do this off screen here for a second before we get moving. Okay. So here we have it. So here's the same stuff that we've downloaded here. And what I want to do, just like we've done in the past, is take our original folder structure and just copy it into the next one. So just copy paste. And here's ICE 6. And then what I want to do again is just bring up Visual Studio Code and just get us started. I'm not going to start yet. I'm just going to talk about this as in something that I want to begin with, right? And again, couple things just as a review of what we did last time is we had our server and we had our roots, and you can see that we have everything in here. Whenever we start, like I've said in the past, the best thing to do is do a kind of a npm install if you haven't had a chance to do that. Here, you can clearly see that there are no npm modules, so let's do that. So I'm just going to kind of do a control backtick and then do a yarn install. So that's kind of the first thing I want to do. And it says something that happens is it says expected version 20.2 got version 20.1. So why is that, right? Because if we look here at our package.json, if you ever see that, I've specified a node version of 20.2 and as an example, and then my node version is 20.1. Again, differences between my laptop and my desktop computer. So again, nothing to be afraid of. If you ever get this kind of stuff working with two machines like I am, there's some ways to fix this. So again, what we do is we do an MVM list, and we can see what we're at. We can see that the current version is 20.1.0, and I've been working with you guys 20.2.0. And so I'm just going to do that here as well. I'm working with my PC this week as well, as opposed to the Mac. But again, the differences are negligible in terms of how this should work. So again, I'm going to do kind of an MVM install. And if I want to install a certain version, 20.2.0, then it should just be that simple. All right, so I can just go in there and install the version we've been using this whole time. I'm not going to keep updating things. Like I know that there's a newer version if we want to, right? So again, if I was to look up online, and if I was to look at Node.js, Node.js continues to spin, right? So you can see that we're at 20.3.0.1 actually, right? So I mean, you can see that every week or every other week they come up with a little minor version and some kind of patch. Okay, so that's the way the version control works. The major version, minor version, patch. Okay, that's how it works. And so they come up with a minor version change every week or every other week. Okay, I'm not going to keep following that because it's just too difficult to do. So I think the best way to do it is what I'm doing is keeping it 20.2.0, which is what we did. So now that we had that, I can do an MVM list again, and you can see that 20.1.0 is what I had, right? And I want to use 20.2.0. I'm going to do an MVM use 20.2.0, and you can see that I swap out. Now there's a challenge to this, and one of the challenges that I know people have expressed, let's just do a clear and do that again, MVM list, is when you switch from one version to the other, you lose all your modules. Well, it's true because every module, every version is slightly different. So again, if I was to try and do something like a nodemon, again, you can see that nodemon doesn't exist in this version because we have to do that. So some people have expressed that. They're like, I loaded, I already added nodemon and then I changed my MVM version and it's gone. It's not gone. It's just that you have think about it as a separate folder with all the node modules swapped out. Okay, so then what I would do is basically say something like an npm. I usually use npm for global modules, npm install, and then the stuff that we want. So I want nodemon, -g, right? And -g, of course, is global, so I'll put it in the global, place. Also notice that it says version of npm available of 9.66. It's asking us to go to 9.72, right? And you can see here that we're sitting at 9.66. I'm leaving it the way it is. Okay, again, because see this, I'm not going to try and change these too much because, again, you can see that these are minor versions updating. And if I keep doing this and follow along with this kind of stuff, it's going to cause incompatibilities with what we've been doing. So I'm leaving it alone, although I know it exists. Okay, npm install TypeScript. We know we have to put that in as we did last time. And we're also going to do npm install express-generator, although we don't really need that anymore. But I'm putting it in there because those are all the modules that we had previously, as well as the last one would be npm install yarn -g. If without yarn -g, we couldn't do yarn commands, which is, I prefer yarn for client-side stuff or for stuff that I'm going to be doing with the server specifically, not my system, right? Okay, so that is kind of those are the installations. And now if I do a yarn install like we did before, it should work now, and there shouldn't be any warnings or errors or anything like that. And of course, what that did, my yarn install, it added in the node modules that I was missing. Again, that node modules is not going to go up to it's not going up to GitHub because of my gitignore file. My gitignore file that I've included for you guys, it kind of ignores node modules and other things that I put in here. Okay, so that way we can use kind of node modules locally, but then they won't appear on the on GitHub, so it doesn't pollute your site so too much. Okay, great. So that's the first thing, and then I have all these changes, and I'm going to just basically do a git add dot. Let's try this out, and it says fatal, not a Git repository. Okay, so what does this mean? Why did this happen? Well, because when I downloaded everything, there's a bunch of ways to download stuff. And the way I downloaded this one, and again, this is I'm just going over some of the challenges that people have reported. They're like, I don't know why, but I get this fatal error when I download stuff from GitHub, right? So Robert, since you're here, why would I get this fatal error if I downloaded stuff from GitHub? What do you think? Just curious. If you were going to troubleshoot with somebody else and help them out, what would you say? So, well, two things. One thing, yeah, go ahead. Let's see if you can understand.
Mine doesn't do that.
No, yours wouldn't, but that's because you follow the process.
Yeah.
So let me explain what happened, right? So when you get this error, and I said download, some people, what they do is, some students have reported this. They go to GitHub to download their stuff on their machine or another machine, and they click download zip. Okay, so once I download the zip archive, I have I don't have any commits. In fact, it doesn't download my .git folder at all, right? And that's what I've done here. I've done it on purpose just to show you that that is something that people have been experiencing, and they even experienced it during the test. They're like, I don't know why, but I downloaded everything and it doesn't work. It's not working anymore. I can't put things up on GitHub. I have to make a new repository. The answer is no, you don't. The reason why it didn't happen is because you didn't go through things the right way. So let's do things the right way this time. So instead of me downloading stuff by going here, that's not correct. What I got to do is, if I was going to kind of clone this repository, I need to clone it, which I haven't done. So let's go back to this. And I'm going to skip back out to here. And let's just get rid of this for a second. Let's just delete that. Okay. And how about we just close off Visual Studio Code? It won't allow you to delete if you have Visual Studio Code open, right? Because I'm currently using it, right? So there it is. And let's put that together for me this time on my desktop. So here's Georgian. And I'm just going to go and make a brand new folder on my desktop. Actually, realistically, I don't even have to do this. As long as I give, the input to my desktop when I do this, it'll actually install this folder right on my desktop under Georgian. So all I need to do is just give it the Georgian navigation, right? So I can kind of navigate to this file right here. So let's do that with command prompt. So we'll say put up command prompt. Here it is. And again, this would be the same if you did it with the Mac, except you'd be using terminal instead of command prompt. So here I'm going to navigate, and just like I would do on the Mac, I would go do a CD, issue a CD command, which is change directory, and then just drag and drop the folder that I want to get into. So it's Georgian right in here. And that'll be the folder that I'm going to install stuff. And then I'm going to do the following command. I'm going to do a git clone, right? And then up here, instead of where I download, I can just click this, which is, come and copy. I can copy this part back to my command prompt, right click, and then press enter. Now this is on the Windows machine, but on the Mac, it'd be very simple. You just right click and command V, which would copy the link. This is the link to your repository. And then now you can see that I've downloaded and installed everything properly, right? That's what it does. Now it doesn't just download stuff. Let me show you. So if I go back to my folder structure, you can see now that I have MDEV1004 M2023 ICEs. So it does everything there. Plus, it gives me this headin.git folder. That's what I was missing last time. And that's why I had that problem. Let's do this again with Visual Studio. So back to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to just drag and drop my ICE 5, or let's make a new ICE 6. Let's do that like we did last time. So Control C, Control V, or Command C, Command V on the Mac. Same thing for the most part. Rename this to ICE 6 and drag and drop it into Visual Studio Code. You can see that that is something that we've done. And it's asking, it says Git repository was found in the parent folders of the workspace. Would you like to open the repository? And the answer is, well, it says, do I want to do this? I'm just going to click this X, and so I can ignore what it says, right? And let's do that again. So let's install this with yarn. So I'll say yarn install. And again, you'll see that it does the same thing. It downloads the node modules folder, right? And now let's make some changes. So package.json, it says ICE 5. Let's change this to ICE 6. So here's ICE 6. That's what we're doing there. So we know that is the case. So we made one change to the package.json file. That's the only change we made. And I'm just going to do my add this up to the Git repository now. So I'm going to say git add dot. That worked this time, right? Because if I do a git status, you can see that it says these are all the new files that it's added, right? Which is my from my folder. That's what I did. And if I do issue a git log, that's the other command, you can see that we're out of sync. This is what, when you see something like this, you can see that we're out of sync. And let me explain how I know this, right? Because it says our head main, right, is where we're at. And here origin main and origin head, you know, they're all kind of listed here at the top, right? And now what happens is if I do let's say quit. Let me show you this again. Let's do so we added all the files. Git add dot adds all the files to the staging area. Let's do a commit. So I'll show you this. So I'll say git commit -m, and we'll say added project files for ICE 6, right? That's what we did. You can see that that now creates all that, you know, the change there. And if I do, if I go back and if I do a git status, you can see that there's nothing to add. We're on branch main, but it says your branch is ahead of the origin main. Origin main is a remote branch by 1 commit, right? It says do a git push. That's what you need to do. Well, let's see what happens if I do a git log. How does that look now? So you can see that it does a couple things, right? You can see that the head main is here with a new commit, and then origin main is behind head main. Okay, when you see this kind of stuff, this is an indicator of where we are locally, anything that looks like this. And this is an indicator of where we are remotely. You can see that clearly this previous commit, which is modify package.json, that was done June 12th, right, as an example, that was the last commit we did to our ICEs folder, right? Whereas here, I'm making a new commit today on July 3rd, right? And you can see that, you know, this is kind of what it looks like. Okay, so let's get everything back into sync. And the way to do that is if I do a git push. If I do a git push, it will push my project, right, the way it is with the new folder structure, right, if everything goes well, to GitHub, whenever this feels like doing what it's supposed to do. And that is, oh, there it is, fatal. Remote, internal server error. What? That's nothing to do with me. Okay, that has nothing to do with me. It says fatal, access to blah, blah, blah. The request URL returns error 500. That means like GitHub is down somehow. Let's see if that's true. If I refresh.
When I tried pushing my stuff, it's going on forever as well.
So that's telling you, look at that. Even I'm spinning. And whenever you get this funky unicorn, woohoo, that means that GitHub is down somehow. That's what it means, right? And this is an issue. Okay, so once we see this kind of stuff, I mean, it usually doesn't go out very long. Look, there, it's back now. Okay, so let's try it again. So I can try that git push again, and it might work now. Right there it is. So you can see GitHub just had a temporarily hiccup. It wasn't me. It was GitHub, right? And because that's not normal for it to spin like that. Okay, so there we go. And you can see that worked. Now let's take a look. If we do a git status, again, we can see that now it says your branch is up to date with origin main. That means that we're in sync. That's what this means. Okay, and again, to verify this, if you do a git log, you can see that head main and origin main are on the same line, and that means that everything is in sync. Stuff that you have locally and the stuff that you have remotely, in sync. Okay, it's not like out of sync. Not like one thing is ahead of the other thing. Okay, so I wanted to do that exercise because people still have issues, and again, some expectations now for this point in the course. One, you understand how to push things to GitHub. Okay, you need to know how to do that. Two, not only do you know how to do things, push things to GitHub, but you know how to do things like NodeMon. You know how to put things, make things, run things with Postman. All those kind of things that we talked about before. All those tools that we've been using all this time. You should be very comfortable at this point in the course using those tools. Okay, because we've been doing the same things over and over again. Okay, it's not like we're introducing new things every single time. And this, of course, is wrong. I said ICE5.6. It should be ICE6. But we're going to kind of fix that in a second. All right, and we'll do a minor push. So again, just to reiterate this thing, I'm just going to do a git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say fixed version or name. I'll say fixed name on package.json. Git push. Okay, so that's the second commit we did today. And it was just a minor fix because I wanted to make sure that the naming is correct. Okay, awesome. Okay, so now that we've done this, now we're ready to test it. And we always do this first before we do anything else. Again, this is all preamble. We haven't even started our lesson today. This is just me getting things back in and exercising those coding muscles for those people that are out there, right? And what I want to do here is I just want to do a NodeMon, because we've done a node modules. So, and for the most part, it should work. However, we also want to run, before we do that, I want to run, because I'm using TypeScript, I want to do a Control-Shift-B. If you're on a Mac, it worked the same way, Command-Shift-B. And if I do that, Control-Shift-B, you can see that it's going to bring up my task runner in a second. There it is. And I can ignore some of these things. It says, would you like to configure this with make tools? I'm using CMake for other projects. And so I'm going to say not now. And it says activating Swift extension failed. I don't care about that. That's something else. And it says configure projects on opening, not this workspace. Okay, there we go. And sometimes you might have some weird extensions pop up when you do Control-Shift-B. And that's okay. Just ignore those. The only thing you really need here, if you have other extensions like I do, is this TSC watch task. That's what you're looking for. Again, there's two ways to do this. You can do it with Control-Shift-B. Control-Shift-B means build, right? I want to build my stuff. Or you can just issue a TSC -W on the command line. I'll show you both versions. Okay, so here's TSC watch. Again, just as a review, this builds my TypeScript modules. That's what it does. And if there's any error, you can see here we found an error, right? It'll come up. And I talked about this last time. Remember, Robert, you actually mentioned it. You said, like, wait, minor fix. Well, what happens if, we download this thing again, right? Someone else downloads your files, you're going to have this problem.
Yep.
Right? Which is what's happening. And we don't want this problem to occur. So what's the fix? So again, it says error. One thing I have to mention, though, even if you have this error, TypeScript will still compile. Okay? It's not going to not do it. It's just giving you an error. It's saying, hey, I don't know what this is, this serialized user thing. So we're going to come back to this in a bit. But I want to show you this. So what it actually did was it converted our TypeScript, our TS files, into JS files. Okay, that's what it did. It redid that. Okay, so although they were there, they were up on, they're up here. App.ts is where the issue lies. Okay, that's where it is. And we kind of talked about this. If you scroll down, you can see that user serialized user is where the error is, right? And so, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna be talking about a fix for this problem, because at the end of the day, there is a fix, okay, that we're going to be discussing. Okay, that's something that we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to talk about it, but just bear with me, as it's something that we're going to put up here in a second. Let's see what's happening here with our in-class exercise. You can see now I've got in-class exercise 6. Okay, that's where we're at right now, which is pretty awesome. Just going to go back into there, and yeah, and we're all good to go, I think, with most of that. Yeah. All right. So, so without further ado, here's the fix, right? So again, you can see passport serialized user as this. We just want this to work. We know it's going to work, but we don't have a proper TypeScript definition file. So a d.ts file that works. That's why the error is coming out. It's not because we're doing something wrong. It's because TypeScript and Passport local mongoose isn't up to date. That's what it is, right? With the stuff that we have to do. There's a problem connecting with the mongoose type definition file. All right, so to fix this, please forgive me, as any. Oh yeah. And then you can see that the error goes away. Sometimes we need to do this with TypeScript. TypeScript is, a modern technology, and what it's doing is it's trying to add type definitions to all this stuff. We know we did something. Once we've done this, what this is doing for us is, when we look back at this, we're going to say, we had to fix this. There's something we had to do to surpass the error. And the only way we could possibly achieve this was to use the any. Any, member, we turn off TypeScript when we use any. And that's what I've done here, because it's kind of similar to what I did with our type definition file. Instead of me going into the node module itself and going, let's monkey with a type definition file, that was a temporary fix. This is more of a longer term patch, I would say. I'm not going to say it's a fix, it's a patch. It's something that we're going to put in place right now, and then we're hoping that the developers in the future are going to fix this problem, and then we're not going to have this issue later. Okay, so that's what fixes it there. So you can see that error has gone away, and it's literally just that's going to fix the problem. By the way, every semester or every other semester, errors pop up with the same code, right? Why? Because again, people are marching on. Developers, it's not like they're talking to each other and saying, hey, are you going to use my stuff? Well, I got to make this thing. And it's not like everyone produces an issue with their GitHub repository. They don't do that either, right? So, it's something that we have to kind of live with, and there's ways around it. You just have to understand what to do. Okay, so that's the one change I wanted to make. Well, now that we have this going, let's Control-C out of here, right? And I'm just going to close down, this task, and let's do it manually. If you can't do it, if you can't run Control-Shift-V manually, it would just be, again, you just kind of go in here and type TSC -W, and it does the exact same thing. It'll just start compiling in watch mode, and it's just another way of doing it. If you can't make it work with Control-Shift-B or Command-Shift-B, TSC -W, we've talked about this before. Again, this is all review, is what's going to make it work. And you need to have a watch task, because if you don't have the watch task running, bad thing is if you make changes to your server and you try it out and you're like, hey, I made the changes, but I don't see any, it's the same problem. Like, you haven't fixed your problem. Actually, you have, right? But you haven't transpiled, then you're not going to know that it's happened. So that's number one, step one. I'm going to leave it like this, okay? I'm also going to run nodemon. And we run nodemon because whenever we use a Node.js backend, what we're really doing is we're creating or instantiating an object that is immutable. Once I create an object, I breathe life into that object, which is, in our case, the server. That server is never going to change, even if I modify my code. Unless I reboot the server, right, then it's not going to change. So that's what nodemon does for us. People ask that question too. They add some stuff. I still don't understand why we need to use nodemon. Well, what happens? How come render.com doesn't use nodemon, right? Well, render.com uses another thing that's very similar to nodemon, but it's happening on the back end. We're not managing it. That way, if something happens, it'll reboot our server. That's what it'll do, right? But to some degree. If something goes wrong on render.com, our server could be down. Like, we have to manually restart it, okay? But for the most part, it will do very similar things to what NodeMon does here locally. So again, if I run NodeMon, and if I've got everything right, it's going to do something like this, right? And what it's trying to do, our default, is trying to connect with our MongoDB online. That's what it's going to do. We have a MongoDB, kind of Atlas kind of structure. So let's go there. So if I was to go to MongoDB Atlas, and bring this up again because, again, people had these weird questions that came up, and I was trying to, to figure it out with you guys. And I was like going, okay, either you haven't watched the videos or, maybe you didn't understand the first time you did it. And so I'm going over again because now after you've done the midterm test and you've done your assignment 1 and 2, I think it should be much more clarified compared to before, right? So here we are with our, our MongoDB Atlas, right? And what we're going to do here, just going to hide me. What we're going to do here is you can see that here's our movie cluster, and I want to browse for collections. So there we go there. And you can see that inside of our movies, you can see that we have our users collection. We have one user called admin with their information. That's very nice. I like that. And so here's our movies collection. And that's what this thing connects to. It connects to our movies collection. And we have right now, I think it's 10 movies. That's what we have. Okay, so just that's what we've done. And that's what this has done for us locally. If I go back to here, this connects. And the way we know that is if we go back to our db.ts, our remote URI is using, there we go. Our remote URI, what happened, Robert? You dropped somehow?
Yeah, Wi-Fi kicked out for a second.
Weird. So here's our remote URI, and the remote URI is what we're using to connect to MongoDB. That's what we're doing here. And you can see I've also got this local URI as a backup. And I've got this because I like to test locally a lot of the changes that we're going to make before I go up remotely. Okay, so that's kind of how I'm doing it. And again, this is all a review. So if I go back to app.ts, you can see if I scroll down that I've got, this is following the exact same pattern. So here's my Mongoose Connect with my remote URI. Awesome. How do I test this? Well, if I go up here, again, as a review, if I go to localhost 3000, I'm going to get an error because, again, there is no root for localhost 3000. It's going to be localhost 3000 API list, where we get the list of our API. This is actually connecting to our MongoDB Atlas Online. That's what this is doing, and it's getting all this information. We're good. Up till now, everything is good, and you can see that we've got all of our stuff here. We can also use Postman. So here's Postman, bring that up. To do something similar. I think Postman's better, and again, there's an online version as well, but Postman is better for us to use because if I was to do a localhost 3000/API, and if I was to send that, then you're going to see that we're going to get a error if I just did this. But if I did API/list, right, and if I did a send, then we're going to see everything in a very pretty format where we actually can see kind of our response. This is kind of our JSON data that we're getting for each of our movies. That's how it works. So this is what we use our Postman for. Okay, review over. I know I spent 30 minutes of our time or so doing a review, but I need to do this because some people have asked a lot of these questions and they don't understand why we use the tools we use because we don't really have a front end, right? We don't have a front end at all, right? We need to have some means of connecting with our back end and manipulating our back end. And for now, that's Postman. And so far, we have no protection that's put in place for Postman. There's certainly we established a user. That's what we did last time, but we never actually had any protection. And the reason for this is because, okay, sure, I can log in and log out, but it's session based. And if I'm accessing this thing and I want to completely protect all the roots for my movies library, let's say, if I want to protect the roots. So the only way you can access my data is through logging in properly and everything else. I need to use different forms of authentication. Now, I'm just going to put this up there. Here's something that we have to consider as well. When you are downloading your, your data, and if we're going to use it in a user interface, this is a new topic that I'm bringing up here before we start into the PowerPoint. We download our JSON data and we want to transliterate it. So make it from, JSON. We want to turn it into something like that's usable, right? And so what I'm doing is here, you can see that all the movie data has been encoded, right, with a, in JSON. By the way, the other thing we can always do is you can also do not just a list, but I can, kind of put a find. Remember, there's our API has different endpoints. Endpoints are, when we talk about endpoints, people are also confused about that. It's the URI, the URL here. So if I do a list, that is an endpoint, right? So that is like the URL. Think about this as a URL, Universal Resource Locator. That is our endpoint, right? We create these, kind of URLs, unique URLs that users can use, right, to access our data. And that's what an endpoint is, okay? So I don't want to assume that you don't, or that you know or you don't know for a second, although you should know by now. Okay, but let's get back to this for a second. Here's Visual Studio Code. So back to this, I'm going to go to roots, and if you look at index.ts, you can see that we have several roots that we've defined, and the roots connect to our controller. And you can see here that I have list and I have find by ID. Here's my find by ID thing, right? So I can do a find, and then I can put the ID of the movie that's in here. Now, what ID am I looking for? Is it the ID like movie ID? Or is it the ID of the record, right, which is the document, right? So if I go back, if I right click here in Visual Studio Code, and if I go to definition, it'll bring up my movie.ts controller. So the movie controller is how you read that. And if I look at my display movie by ID, it looks at the ID parameter, and it actually uses a find by ID, right? Which is find by ID. If you remember MongoDB training 101, it actually looks at the underscore ID of the object. So this is the actual ID of the movie. Okay, so how does this work? Back to this. So here is the ID of the movie for, let's say, for example, Alien. Okay, so if I was to take this ID here, and I only want to display one, then I can go API find, put that ID in there, and then it should only return one movie, Alien. Okay? So if I was to display this, right, and I was going to do this in Android, remember what's happening is I'm just going to do this back in here in Postman, and if I put in a find, and then I put in that ID again, I just got that from the list, right? And if I press enter, again, you're going to see one movie instead of a list of movies, and it's only one. It's Alien. That's the one I'm just using here. That's the find. The ID goes after this part. That's how this works, right? And the reason why it works this way is because how I configured my root. Again, let me explain. Let's go back to this, okay? Because people, again, were confused about this. So back to roots, right? So if I go back to roots, and it has find / and then colon. This structure, right? You can call this part right here anything you want. Okay, I'm calling it ID. I can make this anything, whatever it is that I want to make, right? that's up to me, the programmer, to create a name. Anything after the colon, though, is almost like a structure or I'm creating almost like an expression. Okay, I think that's a better way to say it. And the expression is basically saying anything that's in here is the first part of the expression, and this is the second part of the expression. And I can call these or name these anything I want. Okay, for now they're called ID, but the colon is the important part. The colon is required. Okay, you can't take that away. Okay, but you can call this whatever you like. Why do I need to call it ID? Why have I called it ID? Because when I go back to my my project, I'm looking at the ID parameter. The ID parameter, the parameter that I set up, right? So again, going back to my index.ts, this is the parameter that I'm setting up. I can change that parameter name to anything I want. Sometimes I need to do that, right? If I want to look at title, right? So find title would be a totally different route, and it would find by title as opposed to find by ID, right? So why am I telling you this stuff? Because you may need to search things by title. You may need to search things in the future by poster, by whatever, anything that you're looking for, right? And so, or maybe by rating. I want to kind of do a sort by rating. How do I do that? I can look at all the ratings, and I want to find all the movies that have a rating of, let's say, 8 or higher, right? How do I do that? Well, I need to do a specific type of find by pumping in the rating that I want. And so instead of find by ID, I can find by rating. And maybe find by rating is going to return all the movies that are going to be, have a rating of 8 or higher, whatever that's going to be. Okay. So that's something. And so the name here instead of ID would be rating. Okay. So this is the thing that I want you guys to get, because people are like, I don't understand. I just follow along, but I don't get it. Right. But that's how it works. Okay, so if that's the case, and if we're using the ID, then now this is up to us what we did here. We used movie find by ID, where we took the ID of the movie and we kind of matched it up. Remember, whenever we do a find by ID, right, or any kind of find, right, you can see here that this expression is an object, right? We give it the object, the filter that we're looking for. That's what this does. The first part is the filter, and then we have a response. So we do this, it searches the database, and if it gets a positive response, then it's going to kind of put this in here. There's a problem with this approach, okay? And I want to talk about the problems first before we move on, because and maybe you experienced this problem when you tried it out, okay? But can anyone, well, it's only Robert, but can you think about what the problem is going to be when it comes to using, this approach? When I'm kind of, going through, could this produce some kind of error? Is what I'm saying, right? Could this produce some kind of error? Like, what happens if I put an ID that's something else?
Which
what if it's, yeah, like what if it's not found? Will it crash can I crash my system right now, the way I've coded it so far? Let's see. So if I go back to this, and let's suppose I don't put an ID here, right? I put another ID. I put like 64, something weird, right? And if I press enter, and it's going to continue to spin, right? And spin and spin and spin, and it's not going to return anything, even though I put an ID that's wrong. What if I put an ID that doesn't exist? What happens? What does our system do right now with our route that we've established? And you can see this spinning is a bad sign. If I go back to Visual Studio Code, and if I go Control backtick, you can see my server is actually crashed. This is where render won't reboot. That's what I talked about. Right server is crashed right now. Why? It says cast error, cast to object ID failed, ID 64, type a path ID for model movie. It doesn't know what the heck you want. Okay. All right. So that's one thing. Let's just reboot the server. So I'll do our RS, right? And it's going to reboot the server. Immediately it crashes because of this, because it's continuing to pull, right? So I can stop this. So let's just stop us from doing that. So we're not looking at it anymore. And let's undo that change. So I can go back to the original thing that I had, and let's reboot the server here. So if I reboot the server, you can see we're back to normal, right? And if I go back, I can certainly get that ID back. Everything is good. What if I change the letter now? So it was complaining about a cast problem. I can't cast this, doesn't work, right? Okay, well, what if I did this? That's one problem. What if I change this from a 66 to a 60? Does that exist? I don't know. Let's see. And you're going to see that it says no. Okay. No, coming back. That doesn't tell us much information. And if I want to incorporate this inside of a more robust system, I need it to tell me that it's not finding some stuff. So this is kind of like an incomplete little example. Look, it's good, right? But I want it to tell me that A, if I found it, and B, not only did I find it, but if I didn't find it, what, how should it respond? So this is our changes now. So from here on in, this is the new part for in-class exercise 6. We're going to hook back. We're going to do a couple of things where we hook back to the PowerPoint and come back to this. But first, I want to fix my problem before I add new things. All right, because this is a problem, right? And you may or may not notice this in the past. I can't have my server crash if I'm connecting this to a user interface. If I connect it to a user interface, the user interface won't understand what's happening, like your Android or your iOS application. It's going to be like, I don't know, I'm getting something that I don't understand what it is, right? We need to tell it what to do. So first, let's wrap this in a try-catch. You could do some of that here, okay, where I'm just using a console error to error out. But I find that the better way to do it is to wrap everything in a try-catch. Now, be careful about this, okay? I got to talk about this too. Because whenever we use a try-catch, okay, a try-catch, I'm just going to put the catch here, okay? The try-catch is actually bad, right? And so here's the structure of a try-catch, right? Exception handling, like Robert said earlier. The challenge with this is that I can ignore any error I want with the try-catch, right? Because if I put it in a try-catch, I can leave the catch empty, and if it doesn't work, no error, or it doesn't matter. It kind of, I'm not going to say bulletproofs, but it makes your code that ignores errors. And this is sometimes what developers do is they use a try-catch to get over around errors that they have. Please don't do that. That's not what this is for. This is for when users enter bad data, right? And you want to be able to continue working with your server. You don't want your server to crash when a user gives you bad data. And you want to be able to respond intelligently to this thing when it happens. Okay, so now, this is the structure. I want to grab all of this old code from my display movie by ID. I want to cut it out of there, and I'm going to put it inside of my the try block, this try part. Okay, so what this does is it's mostly good. Okay, at this point, what it's done is if I have a problem, if I can't do this, then it's going to default to this block. So the try block, the way it works is we're going to try and execute this code. And if the code can't execute, then it's going to execute this code. Okay, that's what's going to happen. Is it me, Robert, or is it you on your end that you keep dropping? Do you know?
It's hard to tell. The video kind of breaks up and then it drops off. And I checked my throughput. My throughput through a speed test is like 143, so it's super fast. I don't know whether it's my Apple or whether it's the Apple integrating with the Wi-Fi. I've never had this problem before. This is the first time, so it's weird. I'm trying a few things so if I drop off and come back, don't worry, keep talking. I'm dealing with it on my own.
No, I'm worried because I want to make sure you're good, right? That's all.
No, I'm good.
Okay. So here we go. So you can see that. So this is an issue, right? So we're trying to figure this issue. So the try block, again, we try and execute this code. If it fails, we execute the catch block. And again, this could be used as bad programming practice because I've seen it being used like that. Okay, so here we can be more expressive here with our, when we are positive. This is our positive result, right? But instead of just returning data, let's return more than just this. Okay, so what I could do is I could wrap this inside of a, kind of an object. I could say that, well, I want to return the data, but I want to return the data that an object called data, a property called data, and I'm going to take the data that I'm getting from the database. It's called the same thing. This is the data I'm getting from the database. This is the movie that I found, right? I could actually rename this to something like, movie or whatever. And the data that I'm returning back out is the movie that I found, okay? So that's one thing. I also want to give, our system in the future, we don't have the system yet, but I'm thinking about a future system where it's going to read my JSON output, and I'm looking for the message. And if the message is positive, right, and the success is positive, I'm going to be happy. If the success is negative, I can supply an error, right? So here's how I can do that. I can say success is a new property, and I'm going to say true, right? So true means we have a positive success, that we got the data back. I'm telling the system, the future system that I don't have yet, that everything is good. Everything is A-OK, okay? When I'm saying future system, I'm thinking iOS or Android application user interface front end. That's what I'm talking about, okay? And then I'm going to make a message that's going to say something like movie retrieved, right, by ID successfully, right? That is my message I'm going to give. So now there's three parts to the thing that I'm returning with JSON. The success property is it true or false? The message that I'm going to give, that I can maybe, even use the same message that I'm actually putting in here in my app, right? Because my app is going to access this thing, and it's going to go, maybe a little green pop-up is going to pop up like we've seen in the past that says, movie retrieved by ID successfully, kind of thing. And then my data, my actual movie that I want to see, okay? So that's what this is. And what about if it's false? So I want to also supply that. So I could supply, if it's false, I'm trying to find something. And you think about this almost like a file not found. So I'm going to take this entire object. Let's put a semicolon here to make this complete. Take this entire line and copy it down here. And instead of beep being a 200, we're going to make it a 404. All right, so hey, we didn't find your movie. That's a 404, file not found. That's what it stands for. Success is false. That's what we're going to say here. And then we're going to say something like, no data to display, or movie, because we're trying to get something and there is no data here because we don't have data. So data is going to be nothing. We don't have to, kind of return a data object here. So we can say data is null. That we can do. We can do that. Data is null. We can specifically tell it this data is null, right? Or we can actually, because we're returning one object, we can return an empty object. It's really up to you how you want to do this. We're going to have to play with this when it comes to the front end. And then, we can say, something like no data to display because, the movie was not retrieved properly. The movie does not exist, or something like that. Or movie ID not found. Movie ID not found. Okay, so there's the error code that we're going to get. We can actually make an error code here, like a custom error code, like error, error 5. Applications have their own error codes that tell the developer what the problem is. Even games have error codes. All right, where they come back with it. All right, so there we go. So there's a display movie by ID. Yeah.
Quick question. You notice on your red status 200, and this is just weird. It has the blue brackets like in front and behind the success. You see the success, but on the res 404, the bracket is yellow.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, you see, we have. It's just the way that it's encoded. This is just a prettifier thing. Okay. So we have purple brackets here on the outside, right? And then we have yellow brackets here, right?
So it's just like first, second sentence.
Yeah, and so what's happening is second step is yellow brackets. This is second step, so that's why it's yellow brackets.
Okay.
No other reason. Yeah.
All right. Weird.
Yeah. That's just how it works. Okay. It's just a colorization thing. So hopefully this makes sense. This way it's doing it. Now I've recoded it, and now because we're automatically transpiling, let's see what we get when we actually get a failure. So if I go back to this, and if I refresh, you're going to see now it's going to say, okay, success true. It says message movie retrieved by ID, right? And it says data null. What? That's not true at all, right? Success is not true if we put in an ID. What happens if the ID is not found? So this is something went wrong here. This is where the problem is. So yes, I returned true if we did it. What about in here? Console error is if it's an error, right? If there's an error, it's going to print out an error. So if I go back to the console, right, you can see that there's no error in here. This is the then catch statement. Okay, good. But what happens, I want to actually see that negative message comes up. So let's put this piece, this is what I really want, but I don't want it here, right? Maybe I want it in here, right? So success false, movie not found. Let's see if this works for us. So save. And let's go back out to this and refresh. And we're still getting a success true. Huh? But it says movie retrieve ID successfully, but we didn't really retrieve an ID successfully at all when we got data. Well, this catch is a catch-all for any errors. This is not a catch-all if it doesn't find it, right? What we want to do is do an if statement in here. So basically what we're going to say is, and there's a couple ways to do this, to code this correctly, right? But I want to do a switch case in here, or some kind of switch that basically says, hey, if the data is null, this should be different. So we're going to say something like, if data, right? If data is true, if there's data, let's try this first, then everything is good. That's what I want to say, right? But what about if there's no data? Data doesn't return at all. Well, we're going to say that there's else, right? So that's something that we want to put in there, right? And notice that mine is coding for me and yours may not, right? So why is mine coding for me and yours is not, right? Well, because if you think about what this is, right? I'm using something called GitHub Copilot, right? Which is an AI that's helping me code as we go. GitHub Copilot is something that you can check out if you're interested. So if I go to GitHub Copilot, wow, there's GitHub Copilot. And it's something that you can experiment with yourself. It's not free for anybody, right? I don't believe at this point. But what you can do is you can literally type in some stuff, like let's say some comments, and like something like this, and it'll actually produce these two comment lines here, and it'll produce the code that comes underneath here for you automatically, right? Similar to ChatGPT, but built into it's used directly with Visual Studio Code, and it also gives you code hinting in real time, which is not what ChatGPT does. Similar to ReSharper, we're going to use ReSharper on Visual Studio, or other kinds of visual assist tools, like, for example, something called Visual Assist, right, which is what's being used a lot of times in the industry. Okay, so again, what I'm talking about is tools that can help you code better. There's one called Visual Assist. Okay, that's kind of a standard that people use in the industry. And what Visual Assist does is it helps you for C, C++, and C# developers to code better. A lot of people use Visual Assist when they're programming with Unreal Engine, as an example, because it's really good. Hey, awesome. Doesn't help us much, right? And the other one is, and this is not IntelliSense. This is something else. It's AI helping us out, or IntelliCode even doesn't help us as much as this, okay? So that's Visual Assist. The other one is ReSharper. So if I go to ReSharper, JetBrains, the same people who make, and I think I mentioned this before, the same people who make Android Studio they also have a series of tools. One of them is called ReSharper. There's two versions, ReSharper, and there's ReSharper C#, ReSharper C++. There's two that works. Again, both those tools are geared for C# and C++. Doesn't help us any. So this is nice, these two tools, but it doesn't help us. But GitHub Copilot does. GitHub Copilot understands JavaScript and TypeScript and makes some suggestions, and it even understands your some of your own coding habits. Okay, so things that it looks inside your code and says, these are the patterns I see. Can I make a suggestion? And that's what it does, similar to using ChatGPT in real time. And one day I think it's going to be something we don't have to pay for, just like we're using ChatGPT right now. But maybe we'll see how that goes. All right, back to this. So now we can see that, this suggested this problem. Let's see if we're going to fix this problem in a second. Let's go back up here and let's kill some of these windows. And let's see what happens here with this. If I refresh now, it says false. All right, so, and this is what we want. We wanted to test this out. Remember, it's always good to get a false reading first. Hey, it doesn't work. And then now we know that it didn't work. We tested it and we fixed the problem, and now we've refactored it to something better. Okay, so now the next question is, can we do something different here, right? Because there's three things change here. The success is true goes to false, the message goes to something else, and the data goes here. And also the status goes from 200 to 404. There's a lot that changes here, so an if-else to me is probably the right structure, okay? Okay, so that's number one. Next, this is no longer any good. This is really a server error. If it's, if you put in something that is weird, all right, and let's make this a 500 now. Okay, so 500 server error. Really what we want to say here is, not just movie not found, but something else happened. Let's see if we can do that. We can say something went wrong, right? Something went wrong. Okay, just to show you this thing. And that's why these little messages are super important for us. It's not enough to just return data when we're working with an API. We want to return messages back to the user to help them understand what happened so they can do things properly. Save. All right, so now I'm going to refresh. You can see that everything is still this, but what if I go back to that other problem where I change this and I make it something odd like this? Then it's still going to say movie not found, right? And it's crashing our system, right? This shouldn't crash our system. Let's see what happened, right? So it says, okay, a B-sound error. It says ID cast error for the movie and all this kind of stuff. And it still crashed their system. It still has that same problem, right? It says message format is undefined, ID 64. It actually got there, right? And it's not correct. This is something that can crash our system. We can't allow that, right? If someone pulls in a thing to do that, that's so. Our attempt to do a try catch, going back to this problem that we had before, right? Our attempt to do a try catch is not good enough. So again, Robert, suggestions? What do you think? What do you think we should do? Because again, if I do a restart server, it's still going to crash again, right? Because we're still doing this. Okay, so
yeah, that's weird because mine did not come up with a crash. Mine just came up with like the get API 404, but no further details after that.
So, I mean, again, look at what I put. Try this. Try putting 64 in there, like something else like that, like not a whole ID, just partial ID. Or what happens if I put a no ID, right? No ID. That gives me. It says API find with nothing. That's okay. That's going to give you an error that says cannot get. I don't understand what you're doing here. There's no ID here, right? It won't work, right? But if I do 0, right, and if I press enter, now it's going to spin forever. It's going to try and figure out what you want, right? And 0 doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense, right? So the catch that we made, right? The catch that we made, I'm just going to just redo this and then refresh, right? You can see that the error is okay, And here it rebooted by itself, right? Because I went back to normal. It actually reboots if I get a new signal. But it actually gave you a BSIN error, right? Which is the ID, path ID for 0 is not found. It doesn't understand what this is. You know, when we want to give it an error like this is an issue because it says.
So the most simplistic thing would be to check for 12 characters.
That's simplistic, yeah. If that's how big it's going to be, right? So you could say that is ID. Can I parse it somehow? Can I try and parse this thing to make it something that is realistic? Does the ID match? Do I have some way of matching this ID? I got to verify that what someone is giving me is you know, it doesn't even get to this because see what's happening is it says, well, I got something, right? I got something. So the try catch, although I put in whatever it's going to do, it never gets to this part because we do have an ID. We've got something, right?
Right.
And if I don't have something, like if I got an ID that's corrupted or something weird, that's not going to trigger the try catch. Again, I'm talking about this as in something that we want to do. We want to be able to, you know, kind of put out some message. What if I don't have a JSON status? What if I just did this? Is that something that's going to help us? So if I did something like, well, if I have a problem here, if it triggers a problem here, if I'm trying to find something, then it's going to kick me out over here. It's not going to be a 500. And I want to see what this does for me here. Also, this kind of triggered here as well. All right. Well, let's see what triggered. Okay. And what's going to work for us. Say, back to this. And if I put a find 0, right? Again, this is spinning. And let's see what it did. It said a cast error is what I found. Okay, good. So where did this thing go? How did we, in our code, right, as an example, so here's our code. Did it come here or did it go here? So let's do over here. So if it did a cast error, let's do a res JSON. Let's do a res JSON, and then we'll do the 500 that we had before, right? Res JSON, where we do a status 500, because that is a server problem, right, that we're going to get. And something went wrong here, and let's see if this triggers. So a try, we're going to register something here, and let's see if it's going to return some kind of status. So back to this, and you can see exactly what happens. Something went wrong when I went to 0. Right? Because basically what I'm doing is, but it didn't crash. Let me explain now. All right. So back to this. So here is where it's back to normal. It says, hey, API 0500 connected to MongoDB. It didn't crash because something went wrong. Right? And the only way it's going to get to this point right here, I just put this in here. The only way it's going to get here is if I put a value in here that doesn't make sense. For example, something like 64. Right? Well, that's okay. But let's say I put 64, right? Then it says something went wrong, but it didn't crash. It didn't crash, right? 64 doesn't know what it means. It did output this error, right, for us because we've told it to output that error. Here, console error, what the error is, and we said that it's thing. So this console error is something that is for us, for the developer. It's not for the user. The user's not going to see this error. They're just going to see spinning. The reason why it crashed the last time was because when it got here, it didn't know what to do. We need to respond with something. Request response. I sent a request out and I got no response back. I need to send a response back, whatever it is, right? And so this is not really a 500, because you're putting in a value that doesn't exist, right, in the system. It's giving you an error because it's trying to parse something that's not right. Well, most likely what's happening is you're giving it a thing that it can't find. Okay, so there's two types of errors. One of them is I've given you the correct ID length, like you said, like 12 characters or whatever it's going to be, but the characters are wrong and it hasn't found anything, and I'm getting like a 404 back, file not found. But what if I put something weird, like an incorrect ID type? Like something that's like wrong, like 1 or 0 or 64 or something that doesn't quite match the length. Even if I was to go and undo this path, and let's put in, instead of this correct path, which is going to give you this back if I just took off one of the characters, like somehow the character was truncated, and I want this. Well, now it's going to say something's wrong, because anything less than this number of characters, the correct number of characters, is going to cause an issue with my input. Okay. So back to this. So this is, still a thing that can happen where we don't put this in. But should it be a 500? That's the question. So let's take a look at status codes and see what we can use. Let's take a look at status codes. Okay, now why am I going into this detail? Because, my friends, we're continuing to develop a status codes, right, in API. There we go. All right, so let's take a look at some status codes and see what they are. All right, so again, 100 is continue, 101 is switching protocol, 102, 103. 200 is okay, 201 created, 202 accepted, 204, no content. Okay, the server has fulfilled the request but does not need to return a response body. The server may return the updated meta information. So no content. 205 reset content, 206 partial content, and so on. There's some other error codes here. 301 move permanently, 302 found. Okay, so we already have that. 304 not modified, right? And okay, so bad request. We could use a 400. That sounds nice. A bad request, a 400. A 401 we're going to see as an unauthorized. We're going to see that later on when we actually put in the Win API, so the JWT, right? 402 payment required, right? 403 forbidden, 404 not found, right? 405 method not allowed, right? 406 not acceptable, and a bunch of other codes that we can use as well. Okay, you can see there's a lot of, things, even like I'm a teapot, right? So, and so on, right? You can see there's a lot of them we can use. 500s are interesting, like not implemented, 501. So the method is not supported by the server and cannot be handled. Something that we haven't done. A bad gateway. 500 is an internal server error. That's not really true. It's not an internal server error. We're returning an internal server error, but that's not really right, right? And so on. So my thoughts are, we probably want to, it says, REST specific HTTP status codes that you might want to use. And if you scroll down here, a bad request, it says the client should not repeat the request without modifications. I like this one, bad request, for what we want to do. So back to our code, right? So this is a bad request, right? This is a 404. We can't find it. So this is a bad request up here. So this is a 400, bad request, okay? And it's not something went wrong. The ID that the person entered was wrong. Like it doesn't compute. So movie ID not formatted. Movie ID not formatted correctly. So we know that we're telling. Why is that? Is that a problem? Okay. No. Movie ID not formatted or not structured correctly, whatever you want to call it, all right? Movie ID too short. You can put whatever you want in here. Again, you're going to return null as your data. So whenever you return null, that's a secondary check. There's two checks here where we're going to give to our user interface, right? One of our checks is false, where we're going to return a success as false. The other check is going to be data is null. So if I have success is false or data is null, right, that means that there's a problem, okay? And so here, we don't have to put null. We can just put data, because if it's kind of redundant that we're putting null, data is data in here. Here, we're saying data is null because, false, and we got some, this is going to come null or whatever it's going to return from the database. Here, it's not formatted correctly. And here, we're definitely having a JSON, a res.json status, where status is 500, because if you get to this point, something really went wrong. It just couldn't do this. It couldn't even find this. It crapped out completely. Okay? And we want to be able to, like, we got to this point here, and somehow it kicked us out into our catch state. Okay? So this is something that you could kind of put together. Now, it's a little bit more exhaustive than what we've done in the past, but we want to be able to do this because, let's just go back to our localhost, and again, you can see that that's good. If I reduce it by 1 character, it's going to say movie ID not formatted correctly, right? And then that'll give information to the user that's going to be like, hey, the system is telling me that what the problem is. My movie ID is not, instead of like the user blowing their brains out trying to figure out what the problem is, you want to tell them, right? This is what you're doing with your API, right? And if I was to, for whatever reason, put in an ID that is formatted correctly but doesn't exist, like 0, then it's going to say movie is not found. So those are the 3 things that we're giving it to it. And somehow, if I have another server error, we're hoping that it never gets to this point down in here, okay? And we probably want to do a console error there as well. Whatever that server error is going to be, we definitely want to console out that problem, whatever the console error is. The problem is we won't get the error unless we put in an error in here, right? So if we say whatever the error is what we want, then we'll get the error down in here, okay? So this error, which is going to happen somehow when we get out. Okay. So this is our function for, kind of display movie. What about other places that we can have problems, right? So again, this is kind of some validation. We want to go in here. I want to add a movie. Okay, so what could happen? What bad things can happen here, right? Again, somehow the user gives me with their system. I don't want my stuff to crash, right? And what do they give me? They give me, genres and directors and writers and actors somehow. That doesn't exist. I'm trying to split something, right? I'm trying to split something, trying to do these splits on genres, directors, writers, and actors that don't exist. That'll cause me to have a problem, right? In other words, what if my array size is 0 somehow? They don't even enter anything. Or when they make their user interface, they're creating a user interface for my backend API. They don't do things properly, right? Then I'll get an error here. So again, what I want to do is wrap this in a try catch. Yeah, there's my try catch. And this time we'll put the catch error in there because we know we're going to use it, right? And see, we're suggesting something already. And then what I want to do is in here, I want to grab all of this fine work that we've done, cut it, and then put it inside of my try block, right? That's what I want to do here. So it's going to try and do stuff. Now, we need to return some intelligent responses again, right? Where res.status, again, is 200. My JSON is good. I want to return the movie here. So I want to do the same thing where movie added successfully is what I want to say. So I want to say, again, I'm going to create a object. And I want to say something like success when we're here is true. The message is going to be movie added successfully. So a successful message, right? And the data is going to be the movie that I'm adding in. Again, notice that the format is the exact same. Success, message, data. Success, message, data all the time. Because we don't want to give our system something that it doesn't expect. Okay? So that's something if the movie was added successfully. Okay. We have our catch statement. And our catch statement, there's 2 problems. If I actually get to this part, I want to do a res something else. Okay, we don't know what it is. We definitely want to respond with some JSON. Worst case, we want to come down here and we want to say something response, and let's just put a, like a bad request or something like that again. So a 400, right? If we get to this point, and then we're going to say success is false, right? And the data is going to be whatever the movie data is going to be. I think we should just put in no. Right, for here, for sure. And we say something like, again, if somehow we're getting a request and we're getting down to this point down in here, right, where we're not quite adding all the pieces to the movie, right? We want to give this, or something like something that else that happened here that went wrong, right? So movie not added successfully. Something not added, error. And we should probably put something else like that. I forgot to do this before. We should just put an error in here. Oops. error. It is an error. Movie not added, right? For now, this is okay because, we don't know why we would get to this yet. But we're going to see if we can break it, just like we've done before. So this is a 400 error, right? So again, we're going along the same lines as this, 400 and 200. Well, 404 doesn't make any sense because that's a file not found problem. We're not trying to, do this kind of stuff. We're adding a new movie. So we're going to do some kind of weird thing. And again, if I get back to this point, I'm just going to copy paste here. Actually, let's just copy paste this problem. Something went wrong should always be something that we put in here because we should never come to this point, okay, where something went wrong, okay? So far, so good, but can we recreate this error where I'm kind of putting in something where it doesn't exist? Is that possible is the question, right? Because I'm trying to parse something that doesn't exist. Let's see how that works. So save, and let's go back to our Postman and add a new movie, but we won't add the whole movie in somehow, right? What happens with that? How do I do that? All right, so again, I'm just going to, so this is these are our requests. I'm just going to maximize this thing so we can see. We made some requests already. So here's our API login. Here's our API find. Here's our API register. We did that last time. And here's our logout. And let's do a localhost 3000 / and then we want to do an API add. And what we want to do with the add, right, is remember that if we go back and look at our routes for a second, so let's go back to our routing. Add doesn't take anything; it just takes nothing, right, like this. So what happens if I just /add in there by itself? Nothing with nothing. I don't put any kind of other parameters in here whatsoever. That could be a case where someone uses the API and they have no interface and they just want to crash us and they just put /add, right? What does it do for us? So if I press send, right, then we get this where it says cannot get app add, it says, and there's a raw error code, right? But that's weird because we know that API add does exist. Well, we know also that we can't do a GET request here. This is something we cannot test with the browser. We need to do a POST request, right? Because if you look back at the add, here's a POST request, right? Where we're adding in with a POST request. The GET just doesn't work. So they can't crash us with a GET request. That's empty, right? They need to crash us with the POST request. Okay, let's try this out. So click send. And now we're going to get false, something went wrong, data. Because that is good. That is correct. Because, something went wrong. If we look at where we were, back to this, it went here, right? So we actually did a post, and if we looked at our error, it says cannot read properties of undefined reading split, right? It's trying to split something that doesn't exist. So it's kind of, crapping out and going to our catch statement. And what we're going to do is basically, this is just what we're outputting. This is what's happening, right? Because this is what it is. Cannot read properties of undefined, right? So there is nothing that's been added in. And this is a possible error, okay? So that's an issue. So is it something went wrong? And because we're trying to add something that in other words, we're giving no data. We're adding no data. That's a possibility. Okay, what about if I add in, have another weird thing in here, like let's say I go back to the body and I go back to this XWW form URL encoded, and I start thinking about the things that I need. So what do I need for my form? I need a movie ID and a title and a studio and a genre. Just add in the movie ID. What happens if I get that? Well, even if I get that, and if I don't get genre, director, writers, or actors, like if I don't get this from the body of the form, look, this is the body of the form here. Genres, directors, writers, and actors. This is the first part that can go wrong, okay? So what happens there? Okay, so I want to get that. I want to say genre, directors, writers, and actors. Let's try this out. So, and again, this is not validation. We're not validating, right? If a user wants to enter everything empty, right, this is the one thing that tripped us up because it told us that, guess what? We can't split a property of a director's property that is, that's empty, undefined, because the director doesn't exist, and we're trying to split a string that has undefined. It's not even a string, okay? So a couple ways we can do that. First, if we were trying to do a try catch here, and it's trying to do the sanitize array. So the sanitize function itself, which is way up here, that Robert, you and I made, right? The sanitize function is the problem, because it's assuming that whatever we're sending in here is a string, right? And unfortunately, what's happening is, instead of it being an array of type string, it's actually nothing. It's undefined. It doesn't have any definition for this thing at all. So that's why it can't do the split. It can't do the split or the trim or anything like that, because it just doesn't know anything. So that's one thing. So before it even gets to sanitizing, that's a problem. Okay, so that's way down here when we do our add.
I think you also have a typo in the routine. If you go back up.
On sanitize. Yeah, it should be on sanitize. So it should be on sanitize. On sanitize string. There we go. All right. Save. You see, look at you. You're so good. All right. So that's something that we have to fix. But I mean, okay, it's a typo, but the problem that we're having is we're trying to push a trimmed string to something that goes on. So the sanitize takes the string itself and just trims it. And remember what trim does? If you hover over, it says removes the leading and trailing white space and line terminator characters from a string. So it cleans it up. That's why we're calling it sanitize, right? And if we go back to what we're doing here, right, before we get to that, we're trying to split something, because we're doing it in one line. We're trying to split something that doesn't exist. Genre doesn't exist. We try and do a split before we even get to sanitize. It craps out because there is no genre. That's a problem, right? So ways we can accommodate this, right? We can say if genre is empty, well, we can crap it out. Like if something is missing from one of these things, we can do simple validation and say, movie added incorrectly, or because maybe, you need to put in genre, director, writers, and actors. Maybe they're required fields or whatever. So if any one of these fields is undefined, then the entire thing is undefined, right? In fact, you can do that for any one of these things. You can have a long if statement to say if this or this or this or this or this or any of these fields are undefined, any one of them, if it's important, maybe not the body, or maybe not the, there might be something that you like, the short description. If I don't have the short description of the film, I mean, is it really necessary to stop me from putting in a film, a movie? I would say not, right? I can add that in later. I can update it and add it in. But things like title should be definitely required. And if we looked at the model, right, that we're looking at here for our movie model, right, we don't really have any place that says it's required. Nothing like that we say that says it's required. Our movie schema is actually very much more complex than this, right? When we kind of go in here and create a movie schema. Remember that our schema has a single type, which is string, as well as a more complex type from Mongoose that we want to use. So I could, let's say, for example, if I'm creating a new schema, I could say, my property, here's my property. I'm just giving you you don't have to do this with me. But the property, instead of being a string, can be whatever I want. So you can see that I have a couple of things that I can use here. So I can say the type, right, as something that I want to use. And is there something that makes it so that it's required on the back end? And let's take a look at kind of stuff that we can have here. All right, so I'm going to back out here. We kind of saw this, by the way, in our user. Here's an example of a more complex thing where we have type and default. All right, and you can see that created has those two pieces where we can actually do a more complex type definition for our Mongoose model, right? Okay, so back to this. Where is it? Here we go. Back to this. So if I went to Mongoose JS, right? Because we want a Mongoose model, right? And if I go to read the docs, And if I go to models, right, and and maybe there's a place where we have a schema here for a second. So it talks about querying, deleting, updating, and changing streams and views. And I don't think this is what we want. We want a schema. Okay, here it is. There's the schema, and you can see the schema types, right? So you can see that schema types are string, Boolean, object, mixed, and so on, right? And I want to make a complex type, right, where I want the schema itself to have, notice that there are a lot of things here where I have, schema, and I want to be able to, kind of define a item that is required. Is that something that we can do? So what other options are there for my schema? So instead of me kind of creating a very simple type, right? Here's a very simple type. How do I make it so that I make a complex type, right? With a schema. What is the stuff in here for this? So again, if I was going to look it up, and let's use ChatGPT because it's going to give us more detail than normal. So if I said something like, how do I create a complex type in Mongoose JS, right? How do I make a complex type in Mongoose JS to access a MongoDB database? I want to specify that that a property is required. Is this possible? Notice I'm not even typing properly. I'm just doing this and see what ChatGPT is going to give us, because it actually is interesting the way it works. So here's a complex type, and then you can simply put in required is true, like I said. So what will require true do? Now it tells us, it says mongoose model, and use the model to create, update, or do the thing. So so here's something we can ask ChatGPT. If a user doesn't inputs property that is required, what error does Mongoose throw? Right? Because you want to know that error. If it's not required, what happens with this, right? So it says Mongoose will throw a validate error if it's something that's not required. And look, it even gives us this stuff where it says, let's catch the error, right? And then we can see that if the error instance of mongoose.error validation error, if that's true, then it's going to give us a validation error. It's like not validated if any of those things are required. So instead of us doing an if, else, if, else, if, else, if, else, if something is missing, it's going to give us another type of error. But that means we need to change our model, okay? First of all, Robert, do you understand what I'm trying to do here, since you're the only person here?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and I'm not sure again if you've had that experience of doing this kind of stuff, but we want to be able to do this, more complex types, as opposed to this, which is simple types. Okay, these are simple types, and now we have to define which ones are required and which ones are not. Okay, so this is going to help us with this problem. So again, here's our movie ID. Is movie ID required? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our own listing of the movie ID. If I don't put in a movie ID, is it going to hurt me? Well, maybe it's an internal something that I need, right? Because I want that movie ID. Movie ID is actually going to be generated for us. Our ID, underscore ID, is going to be generated for us. But this might be something of an ID, an encoding that I want to put in for the movie ID. So in many ways, this is kind of a reference, and maybe for me it'd be required. And so what I would do is let's convert this into everything else. Let's see if we can do it with Copilot. So convert the following, properties to a complex type for Mongoose. Right? Does it do it? Right? And the answer is it doesn't. So even if I say something, I need you to convert, if I say I need you to convert, Copilot doesn't understand that, right? Right? If I do this and press enter, right, it just does this. Right? It does like movie ID string, right? So that really doesn't do it, right? But here's where we can use ChatGPT. So if this is a movie ID, we can kind of take this information, right, to help us code, right? If I take this part here, and if I say, okay, here's the model, so I'm going to give ChatGPT this whole thing. So if I say something, here is the model, right? Here's the model. I need you to convert the properties in the model to complex types. Please make them all required. Okay, now I did this because if I make them all required, I can just choose some of them that are not. Okay, that's why I'm doing it this way. Make it easy for ChatGPT. So let's see what ChatGPT spits out. All right, so
You don't have to be so nice to it.
I know, but remember, one
Please
day,
not required.
you never know, right? Take a look. So it's giving us this, right? And instead of me having to type in all this stuff myself, I think this is a great use of ChatGPT, right? Because what it's done is it's kind of gone in here and said, hey, I'm going to recode. Instead of me having to type all this again by hand, bam, it's done for me. Guys, this is wonderful, right? This is a wonderful thing to do, right? So, and if you think about this, this doesn't change because this is just our interface. But this is neat because this is what we want. So I'm going to just grab the stuff that I want. I'm going to grab this part. And let's see what it does now. Okay. So back to this. We're just going to replace this part with this. And this is what we have here. It's exactly the same, right? Still movie ID, it's still validated because the interface movie ID is of type. We're saying string or whatever. Now we can go through and say which ones are important. So movie ID for sure, titles for sure, studio. Should we require to put the studio? What if I don't know the studio? So the answer is required is false, right? It's not required. Genre. What if this is genre required, right? Now there's some things we can think about this. If I want a genre, a director, and a writer, and an actor, because I know I'm going to split them, I can make them all true. You must enter, this information, right? Year, again, is it required? I can say false. If I don't add it in, I'm not doing anything with it, right? Length, not really required. A short description, not required, right? A MPA rating, not required. And a critics rating, not required, right? So you can kind of put those in there as false. In fact, we can actually remove, and put this back to the way it was. Wait, if we can put things back to the way it was, this is what it was. This is what we want, right? It's code, right? Code 101, right? Let's cut and paste the stuff that I need, right? So I know I need these parts that are true. So I'm going to go and do this, right? As we set things up. We know model and studio are correct. Model is correct. But we also want the genre directors, writers, and actors to be required because we know it's a problem, right? So, and by the way, if you want everything to be true, like if you want the entire thing, you can't enter anything without everything being something, right? That also will require it as true. So it means like if you enter a form and even if you have a required as true means that like there must be something that's in here, like as in a string. If you have no string, that's where it's required as false. So realistically, we could leave it like this because if the person puts in like use some kind of weird form that they make, the user at the other end makes a weird form, doesn't compute, right? We can still make it okay even if we use this way. But I'm showing you that you don't have to do this. You don't have to do like all or nothing. You can put some and some. I mean, if you have the stuff from ChatGPT or even another source on the internet, it's fine. The great thing about ChatGPT is it gives you exactly what you want, whereas the source on the internet may not. Okay? So I'm going to actually use everything. just like we had here before. And the reason for this is because if a string is missing, even if it's an empty string, it's still something as opposed to nothing. Okay? So now, this is the new schema, save. And I'm just going to go back out to our platform over here. And what if, right, actually it's got to be on Postman. And what if I don't add anything here? What happens now, right? What is the error that I get when I don't do this? So if I click send, right, it says false, something went wrong. But I want to actually look at the error code that I'm getting here. Did it help me, what I just did, right? And it said, yep, I cannot read properties of undefined split. So even though I said here that this is what I want, if I go back to movie.js, it actually did the compilation. That worked, even though I said it's required is true, right, as an example. You know, that's not the case, right? It still crapped out here. It still said something is wrong because I didn't meant anything, right, in one of these things. So that's kind of weird, right? So even though I did this, we spent time doing that, you know, and to validate things, let's go back to to this part here and talk about it. Yes, this is the issue where I'm splitting something that doesn't exist. I want to get by this issue somehow, right? So splitting something that doesn't exist, like I'm trying to sanitize my array, right? But I can't do the split first. This part is what's crapping out. Genre, director, writer, and actor. If any one of those things is undefined, then this won't work. And if it doesn't work, it's a problem, right? That's what's causing me to go to something went wrong, to this part, because I'm getting an undefined, which means, you know, one or more of my things isn't correct. Okay. Okay. Well, let's do another thing. Let's bypass that, and let's add those writers, directors, everything in there. So the first thing is for writers. Let's give it a value, right, of nothing, and let's give it directors, and let's give it actors, and writers, directors, actors, and genres. Let's give them nothing. So all of these things are going to have empty values. Okay, and now let's try it again. Send. Now it says error, movie not added. Why? Well, let's see what the problem is. It says, this is a beautiful thing, you got to add something in everywhere, right? You got to add something in because it says validator error, path, movie ID is required, right? And it says that movie's not added, right? Because, you know, it's a problem, right? It's something that you missed. So this is the movie is required. It says error, movie validation failed because movie ID is required, and the path title is required, studio path is required, year path is required. It tells you all these things that are required, and we haven't put them in, and that's why it's giving us a problem. Okay, so that's what this problem is. So this is the next error we got. And we went down here, and it was a 400. So not accepted. Okay, so the validation error that we don't give any director, writer, or whatever, it's going to cause a problem. It's going to cause a problem for the split. The split won't even happen, right? So what we want to try and do is catch the genre, director, writer, and actor. Any one of these is undefined. We should flag them as empty. That is the better way of doing it. So here we're going to say if genre is undefined, right? Look at this. It even knows what I want. Length 0, null, that's also bad. But really, if it's undefined, that's a problem. Or is genre undefined? Let's try this again. If genre is equal to null or undefined or length of 0, right? So it says, and it says, if I go to genre, it says genre used before its declaration, right? So I'm trying to use the genre, but it's not this. It's rec.body.genre that I want to check. So if rec.body.genre So this is the first thing. So if rec.body.genre length is 0, that's like there's nothing in there, right? That's like me validating. I don't want to do this part, okay? But if it's undefined or null somehow, one of those two things, that's a bad thing, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. Let's just do this. Let's start typing and see if it's going to help me. Or if request.body. Directors, look at that, it found it for me, right? Is equal to this. I'm going to put this on the next space there. If that is true, right? Or writers, or if that is true, or if it's this, if any one of these is true, right? Then that is something that we can check, and that'll get kind of stop from us from getting here where we have our issue, okay? Where this is the problem, right? But I did this all at once, but really we got to do them individually, right? Because any one of these things, it should just make them empty, right? So because I'm trying to split them, I can't split something undefined, right? But I can try and do something that's empty, right? Okay. So now here I'm saying that I'm just making this into a string, but I can't split something that's empty, right? Or can I? So what I can do something like this. I can say let's use these little marks here as a way of preemptive strike. So I'll say something like if this, and then this is all validation checks that I'm doing to make sure that we don't have an error with the way we're doing our stuff. If this. Right? I'm not going to if else because it could be each one of these things could be true, right? If this, these are 4 cases where genres, directors, writers, and actors could be false. What we want to say is that can we assign it? Can I say rec.body.genres is equal to this? Can I say that?
Sorry to interrupt. Could you not just build the check into the sanitize itself so that you only need to do it once rather than do it here 4 times?
Yes. Good.
Okay.
But the problem is that we're splitting before we get to the sanitize.
Yeah, that's another thing. Why don't you just move the split into the sanitize as well?
We could.
So that what you're doing is just passing this whatever body genre into the sanitize array, and then do the split and the if inside the thing. You only need to do it once and fix it once, and validate it once rather than do it 4 times.
Love it. I love it. All right. So here's the thing. So we're going to pass in an object. So this is as a string. We're passing this in to the sanitize. Let's try this out. Let's see if we're going to do the same thing. So here's our sanitize. So we're going to pass in the string. Now here we're passing it as an array. Okay? Because that's what we're getting. We're going to get an array of objects. But we're splitting it before we get here. So what if we assume that our object is a string? It's just a string. All right? So if we did that, instead of it being a string array, right? So instead of an unsanitized array, right, we're going to say something like it's an unsanitized string, right? So we're going to say unsanitized string, okay? We're going to come back to this one in a second. If we're going to change our function like you said, and
yeah,
then
I'm going to notice in one of my submissions, I already did this for you.
Right, yeah. And then let unsanitized array equal to string of unsanitized string split. Look, it's telling me what I want to do, right? This is what I want to do, right? But the only way I can do this is if my unsanitized string, which is of type string, by the way, that's why it's having a problem. My unsanitized string, which is of this, right, is, if you look at what this does, is, well, it's going to cause the same problem because I'm going to try and take this and I'm going to try and split it, and I can't if this is undefined. So if it's not undefined, if unsanitized string, look, I'm even getting this thing. If unsanitized string is null or undefined or whatever, which is what we're trying to do way down here, right? I'm just going to take this little body here. So if unsanitized string is equal to null, or unsanitized string is equal to undefined, then what do we want to do? That means that we can't do this sanitization because, we're going to skip out of this thing, right? So instead of us doing this, if it's not null, or if it's not this, then do this. This is the one we can do. We want to do all this stuff. If it's not null, we can do this. Otherwise, our sanitized array, which we're going to basically set up somewhere, the sanitized array thing is someplace we're going to return nothing. We're going to make it so it's an empty array, right, kind of thing. And an empty array, an empty string array, is going to basically flag that this is going to be empty. It's not going to be something that we're going to need. So we have to be able to return an empty array as well, right? So how do we do something like that? If it's undefined, we can just say that the string is just quotations. We can say that return an array of type string, right? We can do that and it'll return back out. We could do that, or we could just say that the unsanitized string is equal to this, right? Which kind of solves our problem, right? Because then it'll try and split it and it'll create an array, right? That's what it'll do. Sometimes an unsanitized array will create an array. Will it? I don't know, right? And then it'll return the array. Now the other option was what we saw earlier, which is return an empty array thing. We can just, instead of coming to this part, we can just stop it right here and just return an array of type string. That's also the same thing. An array of type string, a new array of type string is an empty array, which to me is a better solution. It guarantees we're going to return an array of type string, as opposed to we may or may not get it down here. So what this is going to do is when we come to this point, it's going to return out of this function and it won't even do these parts. This is good. All right, safe. All right, I like it. Let's go back down to this now because it's not going to work anymore, right? All these funky things we put into place, all this is not required anymore. So this is goodbye. We don't need to do this anymore because we're all doing that inside of the sanitize function. And we don't need to do this split thing. We can just say that let's put all of this in here. We definitely want to cast it as a string because we don't know what we're going to get back, right? So that is good, right? Because request.body.genre is an any, but now we're casting it as a string, which is going to be good, and that'll save us here. And the other place that's happening that we're getting an error, so if I hop down here, it's the same problem later on when we update, right? So now it's the request.body.directors, and this is another area where we're going to have issues. But now, like Robert says, this is a great place to update all of this, right? So we have our sanitized array, and we kind of put an array of genre directors and everything else, and that is a different scenario than what we had earlier. So that fixes our problem because we're trying to, that was our problem. We're trying to split something that doesn't exist, right?
That's much more elegant.
I like it. Let's see if it works now. So back to this, back to our stuff here, right? And if I click send, we're still going to get a movie not added because all of these are false. But, right, what's going to happen is it's going to say, well, we got a bunch of validation errors, right? We're going to say that, cannot read properties of undefined. It says split. That's the old error. Let's go back down to back down here, right? So it says post API add 400. Let's restart this thing. I just want to just restart my server here, and I want to just do a node mod, just fresh, so we can see the error one more time. Okay, so let's try this again. Going back to here, and if I click send, then you're going to see the error that we're going to get a node mod is a validation error, right? So these are the validation errors we're going to get. Take a look. right? So here's where we restarted the server, and you can see that it says failed because movie ID is required, paths are required, studio is required, a year is required, length's required. You know, all this stuff is required, and that's why it's crapping out now. Okay, but this gives us an error that we can give back to the user. So where it says movie not added, right? We don't have to say movie not added anymore. We can say movie not added because if we get to this 400 point, we know that what you're trying to do is you've removed or you haven't included required information. Okay, going back to this now that we've got this, that we've checked this out, we know that movie ID and title is probably the only two things that are required. Studio, genre, directors, writers, actors, length, all this kind of stuff can be added in and updated later. Now you might say that, well, you need a couple more pieces of information. Maybe you need the movie ID, the title, and the year. Let's say those three things are required, right? And you can check to see which ones are not required or are not entered in. You can say like, you can also put out something like error, movie not added, all fields are required, right? So you can do that. So let's just make it simple. You can say all fields are required. You can say that, right? All fields are required, right? Okay, now back to this, right? So writers, directors, actors, genres, movie ID, because I'm just going to go back to here, movie ID, right? Movie ID. I'm not putting anything in here, all right? And let's see what else it says here. Movie ID, title, studio, okay, title, studio, and length, year, short description, MPA rating, all this stuff. Length, year, MPA rating. And critics rating, short description. Critics rating and short description. Okay, there it is. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And got them all. And those are empty values. And I click send. We should still get back the same error because each one of those things are empty. So that's what validation does. When you say required, it can't just be an empty string. It's got to be some kind of value. It won't error out, but it's going to tell you that there's something wrong. Okay? And like it said in our ChatGPT adventure, which was here, right? So if I go back to listen to what it said, which is what kind of error is it going to throw? It's going to throw this error. So in the catch, right, where we do our catch, where the error comes through, if the error is an instance of a mongoose.error validation, we can say that this is, a validation. Fields are required. That's why the movie didn't get added. Required fields were not added, right? And you could check to see which required fields weren't added if you really want to, okay? So back to our code. Let's be more specific when it comes to our response, right? And there's a movie model. Here's a movie controller. And when we say add movie, and we're trying to do this, it says, okay, so here's success. Everything got added correctly. Error code. Well, we can do an error, a check, and there's two parts, right? We can say all fields are required if that's the error, or if it's not that, it's something else, right? But let's check to see if that's true. So here's the error that we're putting out. We're going to say if, right? So this is something that we want to check to see error instance of. So error instance of mongoose error validator error. I love it that it actually did that, right? then we can say this, right? And why did it not like that? Because we have a user and a movie, and we have express, right, as an example. And we're trying to do some stuff in here, but we haven't included Mongoose. We haven't done that. And we're actually using a Mongoose object, because when we use movie or user, we're actually getting mongoose.passport local model or movie passport local model, right? That's what we're going to use. Those are the two. So because we know that, that's how it does we can use the movie object without importing Mongoose here, right? But maybe we need to import it, so we can say something like import Mongoose from Mongoose, which will take care of that issue, right? So now we know how to deal with that error. And that's what that error status is going to be, right? So again, this is like instance of Mongoose error validation error, then do this. Well, what if it's not that? We can still give a res. If it's not this, right, then we can say an else. Otherwise, it's going to give both errors, right? And because it's not going to respond only once, right? Just cut that out, put it there. Oop. How about that? I use Alt up arrow to do the same thing. So it's a 400, but it maybe not of all fields required. You know, we can say something like other error. There's another error. Other error, errors. We don't know what the error is, so we're going to say other error, movie not added. We don't know what the problem is. Let's see if we can, if it gets to this point where it's not, this validation error doesn't work. Do we get this or do we get this? Let's see what happens. Save and back out to this. And we're going to go to localhost. Oops, let's go back to this. And we're going to click send. And we're going to get all fields are required. Okay. Okay, let's add. And if we added some fields in here, we know it's going to work. If we added all the fields in there, it'll add everything properly. Okay. But there could be a case where we haven't thought about what another case might be if it's not that kind of error and it's some other error that the user creates, and we're going to still catch it and say error movie not added. Okay. All right, last one, and then we'll stop this insanity and we'll actually do some JWT checking, right? Because I want to talk about that as well. This is important, and I don't know, Robert, what do you think? You think this is important stuff? Because to me, when I looked at this the first time,
absolutely required.
Yeah, because when I looked at this the first time, I'm like, I don't care about validation right now. I'm not even trying to validate the user data. All I'm trying to do is stop my server from crashing. That is what I'm trying to do here. Because otherwise, any of these things we had in here the last time, they were nice ideas, but it wasn't good enough for my server not to crash, right? And that's the problem, right? So the other one is this update movie now. So now this won't crash this part, but we still need to do the same thing here with the update movie thing. So let's do that. So we'll say, again, if, or try catch, we'll do a try catch. So try catch. And now it's the same, right? We can keep this part. I like this, right? Because that's going to be the same. And I'm going to capture all this stuff here. I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to go here. And I want to change this. So I'm going to say res.json. So res.status. Look, movie updated successfully. Right? So movie updated successfully. That's what I want to say. Okay, now notice I didn't type that. That was Copilot just to make our journey faster. Okay, but we can have errors here. If the person removes an object, we can still have validation errors, which means if I go down to here, we can almost copy paste this entire problem that we have here. Movie not updated, all fields are required, right? And let's see if Copilot is good enough to figure this out. So I'm going to say, right, if this is true, then, all right, isn't that a wonderful thing? Else, right? I mean, that's why I'm using Copilot, because although I'm paying for it, I mean, look at what it just did. It saved me some time. I don't care. Yes, I could have copy pasted and everything. I think, to me, I'm all for, making my life a lot easier. And it just made my life a whole pile easier just by doing those kind of things. So any kind of code hinting or code coloring or code suggestions, I'm all for them. I'm not one of those people that are like, no, I got to learn how to code it. I know how to code it. It's just I'd rather have, someone that's going to be there or something that's going to be there, AI, that's going to help me be better. And I think that's where the difference is. Okay, deleting a movie. Same thing, right? Where if the ID doesn't exist, then, well, we can't delete a movie that when the ID doesn't exist. We don't have to test for this. So we know we've already done this case. So we're going to do a try catch, right? Try with a catch. Yes, and look, I like that whole thing. Error, something went wrong. Well, we can't delete a movie, right? If we get to this point, this error part, and then we want to grab all of this and put it inside of there, right? And so we don't have an ID. It's going to go down here, right? But remember, we have this same problem up here that there's two parts. One, the movie wasn't formatted correctly, right? For the thing that we want to. The movie ID was not formatted correctly. And this is going to be the same thing. Literally, that's a copy paste. I don't have to use Copilot for that, all right? So this is definitely something that I want to put in here where I want to do this. In the catch statement, I want to change that so that this is the exact same thing. Movie ID was not formatted correctly, so I can't delete it, right? That's here. That's this part, okay? And this part, right, we definitely want to do a res.json where we say that the movie ID was successfully deleted. That definitely is something we want to do. Again, these are all messages that we want to send back to the user. And I think that's good, like from a statement perspective. Display movie list, that doesn't matter. There's no errors that can come out of this, right? However, this piece needs to be updated, right? So we can say something like res.stat. Again, if you look at it for a second, and if we say .status 200, success is true, movie list display correct successfully. We need to do this too because this is going to be consumed by some user interface on the front end. We need to be consistent with our stuff. Even though it's going to capture everything, we can't just do this anymore. All right, what if there's an error, right? That's also possible. Well, then let's see if it kind of codes it for us. And it does. Something went wrong because that makes sense. Okay, safe, right? So something went wrong is going to come up a bunch of times, right? All right, and we don't have any other validation there because we're doing that. We have our authorization, our auth controller built into this, and we need to do a little bit of validation here too, right? So what other validation do we have to do here if there's a problem? And I think that for the most part, the only place that it's going to cause an issue is if I'm processing a login form, like if someone makes a login form, and the login form, for whatever reason, doesn't have the right information. Like, for example, here, I'm going to say that, the user information doesn't come true. Then somehow, if there's no user, we've already done this. The user's not logged in successfully. We've already done these messages last time. We actually did a lot of this stuff ahead of time. There is no data in this case because now we're on a different thing altogether. We have this thing, which is different than what we did last time. But for the most part, even if this is all false, right? If this is our registration form, what happens if the user doesn't enter anything, right? Well, going back to this, username, email, and display name, one thing we can do to help with this is if the user error, if the error is, if we have a problem. Okay, let's go back to that. So if I go back to our model, here's our model for our user. So now let's think about this. Is username required? Right? Is email address required? Is display name required? Right? Is created and updated required? Well, no, we're making those, right? You're not going to, get that from the form. This is automatic, right? But username, email address, and display name are all required. Let's get ChatGPT to recode this for me because I'm lazy, right? And again, I would go back into here and go into my ChatGPT and say, here is a user model, right? Please make username, password, and display name. I think display name. What did I have in here? User email, username, email address, and display name. These are all required, right? Notice that there's no password in here, right? We don't have password. Username, password, username, display, email address. Username, email address, and display name, all required, right? Required. And yes, I probably could have coded it myself by now. But what if it was longer, right? What if it was, it made this look like this. The only thing I need to really copy is this part, right? Because these are required. You can't register a user without email address and display name, right? I mean, display name is going to be a combination of their first name and last name. You must have those things, right? So back to this. I can just simply replace this with this, and that gives us more validation on the front end, or right away, and when you're doing it, right? Back to this then, now that that is required, I know I'm going a little fast, but now that that is required, well, if any one of these things is a problem, when I go and do a registration, I have this problem where there's an error. Well, if the error name user exists, that's one possible error. The user not registered successfully is the answer. We never want to give them an error message that says, the user is not successful, right? If this is the case, we definitely want to tell them that it's not successful somehow. Always, it's not successful, right? But we could also specify if there's another error, right? What happens? Okay, so error inserting new user is one case, one type of case. And again, because we have our mongoose error, this kind of stuff, so user exists error, right? Then notice we did error.name, but here we did, excuse me, dying today. Mongoose.error validation error, right? Okay. So I'm going to just go back up here. If I said mongoose.error right, and if I said something like user exists error, does that exist? Look at, see that user exists error, right? mongo.error.messages.user exists error, right? That is something that we can give. We can kind of put that up there. We can say what that is, right? If that is the instance. So mongoose.error. or whatever. But what if I want to capture that it's a validation error, that it just doesn't exist for another reason, right? Is there another thing that I can do to capture that error? So again, mongoose.error.log. Well, we can do that too. These are all things that are connected to Mongoose, and I'm using the not just Copilot, but also I'm using everything we're getting from our code hinting to get that done. Okay, so console error, that's definitely one thing. So Robert, since you're here, help me out. What would you do? How would you make it so that I can do the same thing? I could do that instance of stuff, right? Where the error is, if the error instance of, whatever, then do something else, right? So I can say something like this. If I said something like up here, I could check. I said if error, and then instance of mongoose error validation error, which is exactly what we want. Oops. Instance of. Then I want to do something else, right? Where I want to return. Wow, right? Username already taken. Email already taken. Password already taken. We don't want these errors, but wow, did it ever give me a lot of code, right? Look at that. And that's amazing, I have to tell you. Here's some other options. This is Copilot, right? Password, confirm password. Confirm password is required, right? And then it says, here's the other option. It says console error, right? If error's username or email address it already exists or password is too weak. Look at that, right? So we have all this stuff. I don't want any of that stuff. It's neat. That's not what I want. I just want to say all fields are required, right? So we can say that. We can say that console error. And this is our error for us, which is something like all fields are required, right? Because we're trying to enter, like we have a form that someone is using that's incorrect, right? And we can definitely do a res, return res JSON. Now, here's something interesting that when I do a return, it actually returns out of this registration form, right? So that's something that happens as well. Okay, so it'll say something like all fields are required, and we can say something like, error. User not registered. All fields are required, right? So these are things that, you can make sure that people add things in. All these things are good. And so you can have these here. You don't have to do it if, else if. If this doesn't go, then we want to check both. Both cases are important. What if they don't answer this in? Well, we want to return. If the user exists, we want to return. And otherwise, if everything is good, log them in. That's so far what we have. Okay. So these are good things to add in. Here's our sanitized array. That's still pretty good. Let me just make sure that is good. I'm going to put this up on GitHub in a second. And the last one is the process login. Okay, process login. So is there something that can go wrong here? Well, there's two parts. Are there errors? User is not logged in successfully. So we want to say error here. Okay, user not logged in. Okay. Okay, that's what we want to see. User not logged in. Okay. And if there's a user error, we don't want to tell them what the problem is here. And we could say username or password is incorrect, but that is also too much information, right? Because people can hack us. So here where everything's okay is what we want to go in here. So that's the last thing. So I think we've done all of them. Logging out isn't an issue, but process registration would have been, process login and log out, user logged out, as an example, and so on. But we definitely want to put in error. If there's something like an error, we want to put in error, this part here, so that we know that the user knows there's an error. Okay, movie not found, that's not an error. That's just like you looked for something and it doesn't exist. But this, if the movie's not formatted correctly, that's an error. Is something went wrong? That's an error, right? So we want to definitely specify those things. Okay, and we kind of did that, I think, everywhere else. Maybe not. Okay, save. Ooh, that was a big one. I could have done multiple commits here. Okay, so this is something that I could have done. I've changed the models. I've done a bunch of stuff. And what I've done is I've done validation. So this is git add dot, git commit -m, and I'll say, kind of add it in, we'll say crash prevention. Okay. Now we haven't taken a break, and unfortunately, I know this is a long video. I'm sorry about that, but I've been working furiously trying to get all this done for you because there's so much to do, as always, right? We need this to be correct before we do any user interface next week, right? Because if I don't have this, we're going to have all kinds of crash problems throughout the entire time. And I'd rather do it all at once as opposed to later on, okay? But we need to separate this thing because it was so important. Robert, any questions or thoughts around this stuff? Are you good?
Yeah, I'm pretty up to date.
Okay. All right. Back to the PowerPoint. So we talked a little briefly about third-party authentication with OAuth last time, and we only have like half an hour left, not even. And I wanted to talk about how to implement JWT. Okay. So instead of actually doing the implementation for you, right, I want to discuss it a little bit for you first. So OAuth, first of all, let's go into that, okay, just a bit. We were using our local strategy. So if I go into Passport, this is a new topic, Passport. And if I go into our documentation for strategies, here's the strategies, you can see that we're using our local strategy. Like we mentioned before, there are different strategies that you can use here for different things. If I want to log in, remember it's a third-party trust situation. Again, here's Google. Google trusts me, right? And your API trusts Google, so therefore you trust me. Third-party trust relationship is what that's called, okay? So if I go back in here to OAuth, right? Here's how you would add it in like normal, Passport, Google OAuth, right? And one thing that you want to think about is how this is structured, right? So if I go to documentation, and you can see that they have a sign in with Google tutorial, right? So they have this kind of stuff. So what they have is they've kind of created the login prompt and all that kind of stuff. And the redirect to Google, right? Here's your redirect to Google. All that stuff is here. You can actually follow this for the most part, and it'll be just the same. So login federated Google, right? That is a way you're going to add a route that does that. That passports.authenticate with Google. That's the Google type authentication, okay? So what it's going to do is it's going to prompt Google to give you that, that authentication screen. Do you allow Google to authenticate you? Do you want to share your username and password, log in with, tom.sliopoulos at, in my case, gmail.com? Are you okay with that? Kind of thing. It's going to give you that error, that message, right? That's what it's going to do. But here you can see that we've added in a couple of things when it comes to Google and how to redirect to Google. It talks about how to do that here. And it also has, you register the app. One thing that you need to do whenever you do OAuth with any of those big providers is you need to register your app with Google, with Microsoft, with GitHub, with whatever. You need to do the registration part. So your app is almost got its own little, it's using the Google API. Your API is using the Google API to perform the authentication piece. Okay, that's what it's doing there. And then you configure the strategy on locally. So again, what you'd want to do is you put in your Google Client ID, your Google Client secret. These are all things that you have to kind of create, right? And the callback URL for how to redirect to Google. All right, this is the thing that how it works in terms of configuration, right? So again, passport.use is what we've been using this whole time. Going back to our code, right? Whenever we log in, we only have one thing in here, right? So here's our authentication process, right? So if I do registration, right? Or let's just go to authentication. Passport authenticate local. That is the strategy that we're using, the local strategy, right? So here we're just replacing it with passport authenticate, Google, right? And when we're authenticating with Google, passport use the Google strategy, we're authenticating with Google. And you can see that there's basically what you're doing is you are Now here they're assuming that you're using MySQL, all right? But we would be using Mongoose to do the same thing. Okay, so that's what, instead of db.get, and you're going to do a select star from users where ID is equal to whatever the thing is, it's the same thing. You're going to do the same login where we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do a rec login. We're going to use, so this part's not going to change, right? It's this piece that's going to change. The passport authenticate local is going to change to passport authenticate Google. So instead of process login, if I was going to do a Google OAuth, then I would have a separate path for that, right? Where, okay, I'm logging in with Google. And when I click on that button that I want to log in with Google, it's going to take me to another route. So I would create another route over here, right? Instead of post register, it would be post register Google, something else, some other kind of pathway. And once I have that endpoint, it's going to indicate to my backend that I want to use OAuth, and I want to use a different authentication strategy. Okay, so that's what it's going to do there, all right? And that's what a lot of websites do, because again, our authentication techniques are probably a little bit weaker than authenticating with Google. That's the idea here. All right, so that's the configuration of the strategy. Now, maintaining state, we can't maintain state because, again, in our case, the only way we can maintain state is for us to actually have using local preferences to hold information about whether we're logged in or not on our actual devices. So, for example, if I'm using iOS or Android, I have to save that state in something like user prefs, someplace where I'm logged in or logged out. You have to take care of that yourself. It's your responsibility, right? There is no state necessarily like there is for when we're using the web, and even the web is stateless. The web, how do we maintain state with the web, Robert? How do we do that? Do you know? Like sessions? How do I do that? Like, so I'm
There's a
logged in.
bunch of different ways. If you're doing .NET, you'd be using like a session variable or something like that.
Yeah, but what is the session variable doing in the backend, right? The session variable, what it's doing is it's using the session storage. That's all it's doing, right?
Yeah.
So you can use session storage or local storage. Those are the two types of storage options you have for web, right? We can't use those because we're not using web. We're using a mobile API, right? That's what we're going to do. And so because we can't use those, we need to use something else. So here, maintaining state, we can't maintain state. It's impossible because even with Express session, right, the session is going to be stored somewhere, right? Somewhere it's going to be stored. And because we don't know, we could have multiple users using our backend. It's not just one user connecting to our backend. It's multiple users connecting to our backend, right? Therefore, we can't use this. This is no good, right? We can't use state like this. The way we would have to maintain state is we would have to save our stuff on the front end, right, with some kind of local preferences on Android or preferences on iOS. Okay. Now, if you're using React Native, it's the same, right? Because React Native has some kind of user preferences equivalent for iOS and Android. If we're going to use that kind of data validation, okay. But that's where we would save state. I'm logged in or I'm not logged in. If the user's not logged in, I change my state parameter locally. So I rewrite my property locally to the, and I just say basically you're not logged in, kind of thing. All right, so that's maintaining state. We can't do that. Redirect back to the app. That's what this part is. But basically we're going to redirect back to my app. And now here's where I authenticate with Google for the first time. If I can't authenticate with Google somehow, then if my failure, it's going to redirect me back to login. That's how the authentication process works, right? And that's if I could check state somehow, I'm logged in somehow. Then if I'm logged in, wonderful. Or if I've correctly authenticated, wonderful. Then I'm going to log. I'm in. And instead of just success redirect is /, what I want in here is like save my state. I want to save my state here. And if I fail to do this, then I don't want to save my state. I want to bounce back and give you a message that says you failed. You can't get in. Something like that, right? So the established session part, again, is this the stuff that's really problematic with APIs. And the reason why this can't work is because it's not one device. You have multiple devices using this. So how are you going to maintain state with multiple devices? You can't use the session variable. That means if one user is authenticated, everyone's authenticated. It doesn't work, right? You can't do it that way, right? So what you need to do is use something else. And this is where JWT comes in. So what is JWT? It stands for JSON Web Token. Sometimes people call it JOT. I don't. I just call it JWT, right? And really what it does is we pass a token. If I was going to give you the highlight, instead of reading these 30 slides, the way it works is this. I pass a token to the backend server. The backend server looks at that token, right? Well, first of all, I create that token. The server passes that token to me. I have that token. And anytime I want to, do an operation on the back end of the server, I'm going to pass that token back to the server saying it's me and I'm validated. I'm logged in, right? And I'm going to keep on doing that thing over and over again. I'm going to keep on passing that, kind of token back and forth. The token is going to eventually expire and it's going to ask you to log in again. Okay. It's up to you how you set that up with JWT. There is no logout with JWT. Once you've got that token, it's going to last for whatever length you want. There is no way of JWT expiring you. You have to expire the user by basic, that user preferences. You still got to do that whether they're logged in or not, right? So in the device, there's two parts. The device is the one part, right? The device is going to say, am I logged in or not? Okay, so that's the front end. The back end isn't going to know whether you're logged in or not. The back end only knows that I've given you a token. That token is going to last for 30 minutes, an hour, however long you want this token to last. As long as that token lasts, and if I keep making operations with the back end, it's going to be fine. It's got to be a reasonable time frame. You don't want the token to last 2 weeks. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. That's a security problem. You need to make it last a short amount of time that's good enough so that it's not going to expire. Okay, so that's the first thing that's going to happen. And you take care of logging in, logging out of the user up front. Your front end, you take care of all that stuff. So when I press log out, even though I might log out and it'll process the log out, yes, you logged out successfully, it doesn't mean anything with JWT, right? With a regular web app, you literally log out. You have a session. You expire the session variable. You cannot expire a token. So that's something that's different with JWT, right? Tokens look like this. They look like pretty ugly, right? And there's two parts of a token that we're going to talk about. There's the payload, right? And there's the claim. Okay, so that's part of it. So there's two parts, payload and claim. This is the payload. This is the claim. Okay. And like it says here, what is a claim? Claims are definitions or assertions made about a certain party or object, right? And example, I am this user. That's a claim. I'm claiming to be this user. And now, am I that user? Well, check my token. And if part of my token, my payload, has the appropriate information, then the claim is true. Otherwise, the claim returns false. You're not that user. Okay? So, again, what we want to be able to do is I have multiple people accessing the same backend now. It's not one person. It's not one device or one client accessing the backend server, right? I have multiple people, right? So now think about this. In the past, what we've done is we had tightly coupled client-server relationship. I make a client, and the back end, I have a server, and that server only responds to that client. Okay, this is not what we're doing. We're creating an API. That application programming interface can work with multiple clients at the same time, which means I'm going to have multiple tokens out there that I'm going to create, right? And those tokens, I'm going to expire whatever time that you tell me I'm going to expire them. I can't expire them by manually. I'm going to expire them based on the time that those users that I've set up for each of those users. And it's got to be, like I said, a standard time. But I can have multiple people doing that, right? And there's no front end. I can have multiple front ends, and each of these users can be logging in separately, right? And they're going to maintain state, not me. Okay, does that make sense? So the difference between having a website that logs into a backend, yes, I can use session because I'm a website. Or if I had one, let's say, for example, I only had one app by itself. And that one app, right, was only using my backend as an example. And I never shared that app with anybody else. I made that app just for me, right? Yay, I'm good, right? But once I start going down the path of secure, if I want to create a secure backend, right, which is what I'm telling you here, then I need to use JWT. Now, here's something else. What about if my backend is not secure? A lot of them aren't. A lot of them are open, right? So you can see any of the data and all that kind of stuff. As long as you have an API key, and even if you don't, a lot of times, it's just open. You can get any of the data you want. OMDB is an example of that, all right? So let me show you an API. We're going to talk more about APIs next week when we do an actual example. But if I go to OMDB, right, then you can see that this is the open movie database. Okay, so it's all the stuff that you're doing manually with your API itself. It's already been done. Here it is, Open API, the OMDB, right? And what you can do with it is it gives you the usage. So this is something that we have to think about. So it's almost like, hey, here's my OMDB, there's my API key, and then whatever the key is, and that's how you can search for you to do your parameters. And it tells you how I can search, what do they mean, and all that kind of stuff. This is kind of an example of an API that's very complete with documentation and everything else, similar to what you're doing, okay, with your movie example. And here are some examples. If you put in the title, and what is it going to return? So let's try this out. Let's say if I search Blade Runner by title, right, and if I click search, then it's going to give me some data about Blade Runner. There it is, okay? And notice that the data that it gives me is pretty complete, okay? And there's your poster information and the whole thing, right? All that stuff that I asked you guys to do, all right? So there's your OMDB. Here, notice that I'm not using an API key. It's got an internal API key that it's using here for yourself. But if you wanted to make this work, you need to get an API key. Here's where you do it. You can kind of get you can go free, and they would set up an email address and give you an API key for you. This is a very common way of doing things. This is kind of like a token that never expired, if you think about what an API key is, right? Once I have that API key, if you use that, you're just identifying yourself to me. And once I've kind of put that together, I'm just going to give you access because now I know who you are. Now, here's a crazy thing. It's tied to an email address in this case. So if you register your API key for the first time, it's going to spit out a random API key to you. But I know it's you. It's been tied to you. I can always go back to you. If you're misusing my my site, I can go back to you. The problem with an API key that's open like this, right, is first of all, your email has to be validated. Okay, that's something that you have to do. Email validation here is super important. And then once it's done, I can trace it back. So if I take that API key that I got and I give it to you and you use it and you do something wrong with it, well, that's on me because it belongs to me. That's where this thing works. What we're doing is something way more secure than this, where we're saying, no, you need to actually register your email. And then when you log in, you need to log in and register every single time, right? So once you've registered yourself as a user, there's a registration process. I've got you. And when you log in, I'm going to give you a temporary token. And that temporary token is going to last for some length of time. Okay. All right. So that's what the JWT solves. Okay. So again, authentication, authorization, federated identity, and a bunch of other stuff that it solves. And there's a brief history of JWT. I'm not going to go through here. I put it here for your viewing pleasure. It talks about how this works, right? But what we really want to do is we want to do this stateless session idea. I've also included here some very common security considerations, for all types of websites and for everything else in here. All right. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Like, for example, signature stripping is one of the things that happens where I replace the header, which is, there's two parts, the header, the payload, and the signature. Those are the three parts of your key, your token. and I replace one of them because I want to spoof who I am with you. That's something that they want to do that, and it won't work. JW2 is smart enough to know that when it creates its payload, that part of its payload includes the user information. Okay, again, everything can be hacked. It's not impossible, but it's like you need to get the API. Somehow you need to be able to get this token if you log in successfully, right? And after you get the token, it needs to be somehow captured in midstream somehow. Okay, I got this thing. Now I got the token somehow. Okay, good. Now I want to read the token and change the signature information somehow, to my information so that I can get in and I can spoof being you. Is it possible? Yes. And it tells you that careless use of certain JWT validation libraries can result in unsigned tokens being taken as valid tokens, which may allow an attacker to modify the payload at his or her discretion, and you never want that to happen. Okay, so that's some security, examples, and this is what a key would look like. And you can see here we strip out the user, which is this, and then we can make it so that the malicious user can get in and do what they have to do. So is it 100%, rock solid, or I would say no, right? There's always ways of getting around it. Same thing with, I also included here cross-site request forgery, CSRF, which is a very common type of attack. And I've put them in here as well. You can see how this would work. I put it in here for your reference if you're interested, but it's not part of our course. It's a little bit, kind of outside of our scope. But I'm putting it in here because we're talking about security this week a little bit more, and at least you have references to what these things are. Cross-site scripting, what that is, if you've never seen it before, as well as other things. But these are the three pieces of the JSON Web Token that we need. And let's talk about this really quickly before we end off our day. The header, the payload, and the signature is the three pieces. What does the header have? A header claims about itself. I am this user, as an example, right? The payload is the data, the user data, the stuff that you're going to hold, username, password, all that stuff is part of the payload. And then when we use our passport JWT strategy, then the way that we would do it is we would install two parts to it. Cross-origin resource sharing, we want to definitely add that in, especially with the server is going to do both functions, right? It's going to, let's say your server and your client are sitting on the same system somehow, right? So if you're making a website, you'd want to use cross-origin resource sharing. I recommend that also for mobile, just in case something goes wrong. You don't want a CORS error to come up, okay? Next, passport JWT as a package that you need. That's the passport strategy that you need. And the other one itself is the JSON Web Token. JSON Web Token is a module of its own that basically allows you that does all that creation of the web token itself. So it actually instantiates or generates that token. Okay, so that is, the NPM. Again, this is if you're using NPM. Yarn would be yarn add, all this stuff without the save. Then when we do it, we want to add in CORS. Oops, this is the old way of doing requires. If we're going to do imports, we would say import CORS from CORS, right? And then when we're doing our passport authentication, we want to do something that looks like this, where we're basically creating our passport JWT. Again, I've got it all here for you to look at and so on. And this is the modified app.ts file that we're going to look at, okay? And there's some more configuration that we'd have to do here. I know it looks really ugly, but the reason why I have included it here for you is because I want you to see the changes that we're going to have to make to our app.ts file, okay? And then finally, in our controllers, then we'd also have to include JWT when we're logging in, okay? So again, when we do a request login, we're going to have this extra payload that we're going to need. And this extra payload, what it's going to do is it's going to define what's in. Remember, there's three pieces to a JWT: the claim, the payload, and the signature. And this is the payload. The payload is going to be the ID of the user, the username, and the email. And then what we want to do is create the signature by using the payload. We're going to pass the payload into the sign method, which comes from JWT, which is the JSON Web Token module. That's what creates the token itself. And once I have that auth token, the authentication token, now here's an example of, for testing, we might use it, open it up for a week. This creates that token. It lasts for the entire week once you made it. And that number right here is the number of milliseconds that you're basically creating the expiration time, right? Again, in a real world scenario, this is impractical, right? We want to make it so that, if this expires in, it's going to be much shorter, right? Again, think about the common interaction that you're going to make, how long that could possibly be, right? And maybe you need to expire this if the person is not on the app. Let's say, for example, and again, this is with testing, 10 minutes might be a reasonable time, right? When they log in, you got 10 minutes to do your thing, right? And if you do another operation, you have to log in again, right? And a good example of that is if you're logging in with some kind of financial thing, or 30 minutes, or whatever it's going to be, right? Now, this is on the back end, okay? So realistically, you can make it the whole day, right? The whole day it lasts, okay? And one day they have access to it, or an hour, or whatever the common scenarios. That's what you have to figure out. However, what you can further do to protect it on the front end is when they log out, they're logged out and they have to log in, and then they're going to generate another token, a whole different token that they're going to be using for that instance, which means you can have multiple tokens hanging out everywhere if the user is somehow logged out. And the user can be logged out in a number of scenarios, like if they send the application to the back end, like somehow they take a phone call, and if it's a really sensitive data that you're getting from your that you want to protect, then when you come back to your app, you have to log in again, right? Because as soon as your application gets sent to the background, then you log out the user immediately, right? If it's that sensitive. So lots of ways, and these are kind of schemes or techniques that we can use, to really protect the user's data, without storing anything on the device. Okay, and we did all of the stuff with that. So I think for this week's in-class exercise, because it took us a long time to do all the validation, please just do the validation for your in-class exercise. The stuff that we just talked about right now. There is no point piece for you to do. All right, we've already done everything. If you are ambitious, okay, try to implement JWT on your own. Okay, I'm not going to expect it. All right, and why? Because there are a lot of little pieces that we're going to talk about when we do it again. So next week, although we didn't have a chance to finish off JWT this week because we talked about validation techniques, we needed to do that, right? Then next week we'll continue with just implementing JWT. Okay. Is that clear? Robert, you good? You should be done by now, right?
Yeah, it's clear. Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's it for me this week. Again, please look for your marks. By the end of the week, we should have all that in. I think I'm thinking before the end of the week, if I'm not wrong. What day is the last due date? The last day for add drop. Let's just check that out for a second. So, Georgian College add drop date summer.
I think it's tomorrow or sometime this week.
Yeah, it's got to be like today or tomorrow. It's got to be something. It can't be that long, right? So, important dates. There we go. Last day to register courses intake withdrawal 10th, 14th. So I thought so. So the 14th is next week, Friday. That's next to withdraw from summer programs courses without academic penalty, no refund. So we actually have we have until next week on Friday for that to happen. That's when it's due. Okay. So it's, again, this is with no academic penalty. All right. Okay. Any other questions?
All good.
All right. That's it for me then. I know this was a long one. I didn't expect it to be so long, but we did talk a lot. I talked a lot about stuff, and I felt it was important to go through this. And I did that, although I had a plan to do JWT, I did that because I was like, wait, what about this, right? Because I crashed my server. I was running it. I was like, why did it crash? Oh yeah, right. It was one of those moments. And again, I apologize, but I had to take care of this because I was like, it made me nervous. I'm like, giving you information, you're going to crash your server, right? And I couldn't have that happen. Anyways, guys, and for Robert, thank you so much for joining me today. At least I had one person in the audience. I will see you all next week, and we'll do more of this stuff. And again, for the details for assignment 3, I will post them shortly, but rest assured what they're going to be is a secure API with JWT and a user interface. That's what you're going to have to make for assignment 3. All right, that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much. Robert, you good? All right, take care, and I'll see you next week.